Hello there, everybody. Welcome back to Star Wars Lads. For a bittersweet stream tonight, we have our final Andor Season 2 and final Andor stream. Right now, we're going to talk about everything that happened in episodes 10 through 12 of Andor Season 2, the final arc of Andor, and we're going to give you guys full spoilers. So if you haven't watched it yet, maybe save this stream for tomorrow when you can watch all the episodes and not ruin the ending for yourself. But because we're going to talk about everything we thought about the ending, the entire season 2 as a whole, Andor as a whole, we're going to give a score to Andor season 2 and to Andor itself as well. So we're going to really go in on the show and the experience of Andor in its entirety, looking back on the last few years, waiting for this moment, waiting to see how they wrap it up and tie it into Rogue One. We're going to discuss all of that. So make sure you have seen the episodes before you watch this. This is also a stream where we like to take your guys' questions, your comments, your theories, anything you'd like to discuss, anything you'd like to mention about the show as a whole. Give us your rating in the chat. I have a poll up right now. What do you guys think of the season finale of Andor or Andor season 2? Let me know what you guys thought. What rating would you give it in that poll? Let us know your thoughts in the chat. We're going to go for the next hour and a half to 2 hours here, taking your guys' questions, your comments, all the stuff you'd like to discuss about Andor Season 2. So make sure you send your stuff into the chat. This is a first come, first serve basis for the chat. So we would like to remind you that if you'd like to support the channel, you can send in a super chat, bumps your chat up to the top, guarantees it gets on the show tonight. You can also check our Patreon and YouTube membership programs, which allow you to get priority chat access if you're a member of a certain tier. So make sure you check those programs out as well. Star Wars Lads is not going anywhere, though. After this, we will be bringing back our live stream Q&A format. It's a little bit up in the air for next week. I have a commitment on the Tuesdays we normally do it. So we might push it back, or we might just take the week off after Andor and then come back in 2 weeks. Let us know whether you guys would like us to return and which days you would like to see it. We will be back with the live stream format where we talk about news and all the stuff around Star Wars. It will be a little bit of a lighter period, probably a bigger period for Star Wars news, of course, because we have a year of buildup to the next Star Wars project, but not necessarily as much new stuff to talk about. So we hope you guys come and bring all of your thoughts, your questions, your comments, anything you want to discuss. And again, those are open format. Ask us anything. So you can ask us anything you want. It doesn't even have to be about Star Wars. So hopefully you guys will come back next week for all of that. And stay tuned. We still have videos coming out twice a week, every week, polls 3 times a week, every week, and polls every day, twice a day, every day, 5 days a week, 7 days a week, excuse me. And then the shorts 3 times a day or 3 times a week. God, I'm all over the place tonight. It's been an emotional episode of Andor. So yeah, shorts Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Everything will be the same on our channel. So if you're just joining us, if you just found us during Andor, everything will be back to normal. We had a big milestone today I wanted to bring up as well, 30,000 subscribers for our channel. Thank you guys so much for your support. We really appreciate the support over the years, whether you've been a recent subscriber or a subscriber back when we were just starting out, when we were podcast only. I'm glad you guys are with us, and I'm glad you've enjoyed our show, and we really appreciate your support and everything you guys have done to help us get to this point over the years, and we can't wait to continue to make some more Star Wars content for you all in the future. So getting that out of the way right off the bat, let's transition into Andor Season 2. So we had our final 3 episodes of Andor Season 2 tonight. They went pretty similarly to how I thought they would. They were a little bit more sparsed out, a little bit tighter on the characters of Luthen and Clea. These were characters that have been obviously involved heavily this season, but not necessarily the focus of the season. Tying up all the major characters that we introduced in season 1, you have to kind of wrap up their stories, especially the story of Luthen. And Luthen's death, as we all kind of expected, it went in a very somber way, a dramatic way, but not in traditional Andor fashion. It wasn't this big heroic moment. It was very much in vain with Andor, and I thought those moments were great. I loved what they did with the character of Clea, not just in this episode or in these 3 episodes, but in the entire show this season. I thought they gave her so much better material and really elevated her to that next step. So I hope we see what she ends up going through a little bit more in the future as that character gets to acquaint herself with everybody on in Yavin and starts to become more a part of the rebellion. I threw out last week in the predictions. Maybe they kind of make her into a little bit more of that like Jan Orr's type character from Legends, somebody who's like a spy master, maybe of the rebels. We'll see if they end up doing that. But yes, these episodes got to focus on that. Some wonderful K2 stuff as well. Got a little bit more Melshi. And of course, it wraps up Cassian's story really well with the really heartfelt and sad last shot where you see that Bix, one of the reasons she left is she has a child, which we obviously assume to be Cassian's. And what does that mean here for the future? Obviously, we know Cassian's never going to meet him, and that's very bittersweet, but it does add even more to the stakes of Rogue One. I'm going to pass it over to you, Sonic. What were your thoughts on these 3 episodes tonight? And did you have a favorite amongst the bunch?
Yeah, I mean, I had a great time watching them until that very last scene, 'cause I mean, look, it's a tragedy. There's some mysticism too, right? Just seeing Cassian as he like walks away and he's literally going into his final steps into Rogue One, right? So I was all ready, prepared. It's like this has been something that Gilroy has been highlighting. Like, we know the ending. We're gonna take you right there, right? But that's one thing I'd always kinda worried about, especially when we're talking about predictions. I was like, I feel like this is gonna be a show that ends strong for sure, but it's gonna be very subservient on, like, a lot of Rogue One material, and I expect, like, people to kinda come in that we haven't seen, like Bodhi and all that, and that just didn't happen, right? But then to bring back Bix and then B2 and presumably Cassian's child, it's like, oh, man. Like, it lets itself sit as its own piece of art. It lets itself have its own conclusion, right? Like, how we can almost, like, reflect on Cassian as the life interrupted. There's, like, almost this kind of feeling that I had coming into the end of the show that we're gonna almost see, like, Cassian, like, feel like, "Oh, I know exactly what I'm walking into after that glance," or something, almost, like, more definitive in what he's handling and what's being thrown at him in Rogue One. But no, no, like, it's almost like it's a choice that I think leaves, obviously, Bix and everyone happy and peaceful, like, they get their happy ending, but I also do think it reflects really well on Cassian as a character that just he didn't it didn't end here. It wasn't supposed to end here. If it had to happen, sure, but the way he was carrying himself, the way he was moving, the things he had achieved, he had a life that could have kept on going. The way he had adapted, the way he goes from being Luthen's like one like moment of weakness into the pivotal reason the original trilogy exists, right? Like, yeah, it's fantastic. I think it's nice to feel like it's not over with him, right? Like, there could be a literal future legacy, but there's still space now to kind of reflect on what other stories that could have been filtered between these different sets of episodes during these gaps in the years and see how, like, grew and changed and how he became someone that just felt like he was still flowing, like he wasn't anywhere close to being done. So, I really did like that as a choice. I will say, though, my favorite episode's gotta be the first one because I think there's just so much anticipation, especially after we get Gorman episode and the second episode of The Lost, and then you kinda get that aftermath with Mon Mothma, which is exhilarating in its own way. But then you have to, like, just deal with, like, okay, well, Rogue One's on the doorstep, and having Luthen kind of be the reason why the Greater Rebellion knows about all this, it makes so much sense. It's almost a little too obvious, but I think the execution was fantastic. You do nothing to, like, reduce his character, make him feel like, "Oh, he started slipping." Like, we were talking about, like, how he's showing his weaknesses, but when, the moment had finally come, like, this will be a fork in the road. No, he did the full Luthen thing, taking out that, the ISB guy after all those promises, "Lonnie, Lonnie, we need heroes," and all this and that, right? And he's like, "Yeah, I'm not gonna be a hero." That monologue was not for nothing. Shoots him, kills him, right? and then the way he just kinda self-sacrifices, doesn't allow Clay to have that. That was just done really, really well. And then you throw in all this backstory, which I was like, "Yes, I don't know if I needed it," but it just the way it sat almost so differently that I'm like, "Oh, man, there's, like, an entire, like, book franchise that could spawn this." Like, I could just follow these guys, I don't need them to pop in anywhere else, just see what their life was like in their revolutionary ways, right? And what was that setting in that very first scene that he meets Claire? Is it, like, him chasing the whole big puzzle that he's been chasing from the very beginning, the way he keeps on repeating it, like, all these webs and all that, like, what have we been chasing all along? Was he maybe starting off on this path because of, like, he was on Geonosis or something, exterminating, the Geonosian queen and all the colonies, like, the first real destruction of the Empire, against just a group that they're supposedly protecting, supposedly ruling over justly, right? So yeah, I mean, it could be that, it could be something totally different, and I wouldn't mind it. Stuff like the Naboo scene, I'm like, "Wow," like, just a way to pull on our, like, our nostalgia, our kinda our feelings with the fashion, everything. Like I said, this show has not missed on crafting a scene and a location, and to, like, have all their different spins on every location and expanding on how uniforms can look like and all that. Yeah, that's what I've always loved about Luthen's story. Because at the end of the day, question was like, is Luthen the guy that we see that's with Cassian, who knows everything? He's like the master, spy master out here. He has all these webs of lies, or is he like the artist, the one who's loved history and art? He never wants it to go away. He wants it to be expanded, extended as much as further. Like and anytime you heard his cue from season 1, and it was always a little shortened here, right, kind of exemplifying a little bit more the abruptness of his life coming, the stress that he's under and all that, but seeing a little bit more of that in the flesh, seeing the different settings that he put himself in, what he was living for, what he knew he had to do to ensure that this can continue and expand and not be stomped away, like, he's such a poetic character. I really loved him, right? And to be so misunderstood at the end of the day, right, by the rest of the rebellion. Like, just that's what makes it work for me. Because Cassian alone, right, if you just taking them where they are in season 1, like, no. Like, no, it's like, okay, it's a working relationship. There's a moment of weakness for both, but there's nothing, like, insanely, like, connecting them. But by the end of season 2, I'm like, "Man," like, Cassian sees that guy, the artist, the one that tells to Bale, like, "You guys would've gone along more than you think," and all that. It's like, yeah, that's so much of, like, life has been because of people who brought change and that didn't get to see it, right? And just how their legacy can stand, the imprint on that, like, I thought it was fantastic, and then the only critique I'll give about that, despite that being my favorite episode, was that this is just the fact that we had kinda shrink the show from, like, 5 potential seasons down to 2. Cleo, she got so much this season, and it was fantastic, everything that she kinda had to go through in her own episode, all that, loved it. Don't get me wrong, loved it. But it's like, oh, now you have to tie in some of the, like, flashbacks directly to Cleo as she's literally trying to escape, literally trying to get the news out. I just wish we could've just developed her without having to go straight to the heart of it, right? Like, there's just so many more layers to her that, like, yes, it's effective. It could have been better with 3 seasons to me, right? Like, just something to just space it out a little bit more and let her breathe in that current story. That's, like, really my only kinda critique that I had, and that's still with that being my favorite episode. I find 9 to be the weakest, and I liked a lot of it, but I just found that not really having anything with Saw Gerrera kinda just didn't sit right with me. I feel like he should have been leveled up or at least shown, like, in one major scene that feels like him rambling and going on about just kind of building almost like a thematic, uh, connective tissue between where we leave him kinda huffing the Rhydonium gas and everything. Like, you could have just done something where you see him severely injured or, like, at a campfire or something, and I think that would have done enough to connect him and bridge him a little bit more. Instead, like, it does really feel like there's maybe Mask of Fear, book 2 at best. I
Mhm.
don't know how much he'll figure in 3. There's Rebels, which, he's not a huge player in either, and then all the Rogue One novelizations and all these tie-in books, that's really where you're gonna get him, and it's just a shame because I felt like Andor had, like, one more, like, punch that he could just deliver and strike out at, and, like, yeah, I like the hologram thing, don't get me wrong. It just felt like, "Oh, that's just Rogue One him already." I just needed
Mhm.
something to bridge a bit more, but again, that comes down to the format of the season. It is so compressed, and the fact they'd still absolutely delivered on these episodes is just fantastic. It's gonna be the weirdest show to watch because, a lot of us might watch it on a binge just this season or binge season 1 into season 2. Some of us are gonna go into Rogue One and maybe come back and see a couple episodes. Some people might just do batches like they have here, right? Instead of watching a Star Wars movie, you just watch the Gorman arc or something. It's gonna be such a weird show to, like, look back on, but fantastic all around. Absolutely loved it. I love how they carried everything throughout the momentum from the Gorman massacre onwards. But yeah, yeah, that last shot with Bix, that just hurt. I was yelling.
Yeah, it was a really bittersweet way to end the show, but the show as a whole is bittersweet the entire time, and so I felt like it really fit the tone, and it was another somber thing to see as we go out and we, know what's gonna happen if you've seen Rogue One. So, yeah, I thought these were 3 great episodes. Definitely not quite as good as last week, but I thought those were the best episodes of the show last week, so I didn't expect it to top it. But I thought this was very traditionally Andor type of finale. And one of the things I said in our predictions video and when we were talking last week was season 2 proved what season 1 did, but we kind of thought that in season 1, one of the reasons it wasn't more expansive was because it was the Cassian origin story, right? It was
Yeah, yeah,
going to open up to a wider galaxy in season 2, and season 2 proved that no, we're still keeping the core of the show, which is at the heart. It has a few different perspectives, and they stay with those perspectives. And I thought really, even though there were a lot of other things that I wanted to see, like I wanted to see Galen Ursov, I wanted to see a Bodhi, I wanted to see more Saw. It really did feel like as we were creeping closer and closer to the finale, there was nowhere else to go truly for the show besides Cassian and Luthen and where they were going there. We wrapped up Mon Mothma last week, and so it really felt like that was going to be where it happened. I think it's also bittersweet that they didn't ever come in contact again, but one of the moments, one of the lines that really, you know, made this whole show really hit home was when Cassian shows up and Clea's like, "It had to be you, didn't it?" And it does bring it full circle because we talked about that idea of the messenger last week, and this week, it just continues to be Cassian who's constantly finding himself involved in these moments, all building to his singular purpose, which will obviously be done in Rogue One. And I loved how each of these other things in his life, every little piece, not all of it's important, but it all pushes him towards his next step, his next journey. And we're kind of reminded that again at the end of the last episode when he has a dream about his sister, which is the thing that started the whole show off and then
yeah.
obviously it is never delivered on. And that's where this is like a really interesting show in a lot of ways because it's incredibly satisfying what you see on screen. Everything works so well and it all intertwines so well, but it constantly reminds you of what you're not seeing or what you haven't learned about. And I think that's a really bold, interesting decision for a show of this stature, a Star Wars show that's going to be so widely watched and so widely critiqued. So they open themselves up for a lot of different people to be like, oh, well, they never talked about the sister. What was that hanging plot thread? Or, oh, we never went back and saw Guerrera again. Or, oh, we never saw Luthen do this. Or we never saw this and that. And that's not really the point of the show. It's like this show in a lot of ways is trying to be like there are all these outside forces that are pulling this character around the galaxy, but yet it's a singular path towards this specific moment that cuts the show and everything kind of happens around that. And so I really appreciated the boldness of that decision. I appreciated the direction they took it, and I appreciated how much they kept the character of this show. And so I really liked this finale. I did love that first episode. I thought that was a fantastic episode, episode 10. I thought that was fantastic. So it was hard to top that. I thought episode was 11 was great in its own right as well. I love the K2 stuff. I was hoping we'd get a little bit more K2 throughout this show just because I love that character so much, but it was great to see him have his full on, action scene. We saw him do a lot of stuff in Rogue One. Obviously, it takes a long time to kill him in Rogue One. He fights off stormtroopers forever. so you know how powerful he is. And then the Gorman stuff last week proved how strong KX droids are. If you hadn't played Jedi Fallen Order or Jedi Survivor and had to fight one of them, they showed how strong and powerful they are. But getting to see him just completely clear the way and continue with that K2SO off brand of humor, it was so great. I really loved that stuff too. And the finale was really great for this show. I liked seeing a little bit more of the politics, the rebellion, see him on that knife's edge as we get closer and closer to Rogue One. I mean, obviously we know the show ends moments before Rogue One, so these moments feel even more impactful because you're like, oh, this is what they were doing seconds before that scene in Rogue One. And I did think having Bale there and having him kind of be the one who's antagonistic with Cassian, it made a lot of sense in a lot of ways because Bale doesn't know Cassian. He's never been involved with the Luthen side of the rebellion. And so even though Mon Mothma presents herself as this like purity, this light, this, she's wearing the white dress and she's this figurehead, it's really Bale who's more of that side of the rebellion. And at least in
Yeah.
canon, because Mon Mothma's gotten dirty. Like she's had to get in the grime of things. She's been a part of this seedy side of the rebellion. So she's kind of the bridge between both sides, which was more of Bale's role previously. But now Bale and canon has been pushed a little bit more of the idealist, the one who's working with the Jedi in the past. He's the one who has Leia as that hope. He has this alternate mission of protecting the Skywalker twins. He has these other things on his mind that pulls him from the darker side of the rebellion, and he's a little bit more of the idealist. And I think that goes with his character very well from what we've seen in the films and with Clone Wars and Obi-Wan and Rebels and all that. But he definitely isn't used to he's in the he's more in the Rebels side of the rebellion than the Andor side. And so it is nice seeing that kind of juxtaposition of the Luthen ideology versus the Bale ideology and how both have been there basically since the beginning, even before Mon. Bale was a rebel before Mon, and Luthen, was the darker side. Seeing them play against each other through Cassian, I thought was pretty interesting. But how Bale always is able to kind of let the good guide him. That the line of "May the Force be with you," I thought worked really well too. So all of it was great. I really loved the show. Thought it was a fantastic season, a great last arc. My favorite arc was definitely last week, but of the whole show. But I just thought it was a really, really Andor way to end the show, and I thought it worked and fit for the tone of the show. And if you're not a fan of Andor, probably not going to work for you. If you're a big fan of Andor, I'm sure everybody's going to enjoy it. I definitely agree, though, with some of the things people are saying in the comments and with some of the things you said, Sanak, because this is a show that even though it's so fantastic what you're getting, you still can't help but feel like, man, if they just had one more season, or if they had all 5 seasons that could be done with this show, how much richer would it even be, right? When Luthen goes out, would you be a little bit more devastated? Would you be a little bit more fractured when certain moments happen? And that's definitely a decision that will always be kind of a what if around this, because it's like one of those things that's so perfect in the form that it's in, but it's also something that makes you want more because of how perfect it is. And simultaneously, they could have had a little more because there's so much story in season 2 that's so spread out, and there's so many things that we know about that exist around it. But I think for me, that's the only thing I would want in, like, if there was a drawn out expanded edition of this story, is a little bit more Luthen, because as much as I liked Luthen's role in this season, seeing him start to slip, seeing the galaxy become, part of what he started. And then it's like that type of person who likes something that's not mainstream before it's mainstream. And then when it becomes
Mhm.
mainstream, they're like, it, it's not
Yeah.
as good as I used to say it was. And that's kind of what Luthen is he's this person who's when he's the rebellion, when he can control the whole thing, he's like, it's great. I can do it all. This is what we need to do. Then when other people are involved, he's like, oh, those people don't know what they're doing. Like, I'm going to be even more closed-minded, even more singular in my focus than I was before. Um, and so I think it makes sense for the character to treat him this way, where you're even more distant from him than you were in season one. But I would have still liked to have maybe a few more moments of seeing him have moments like we saw in season one, where he has those monologues, those speeches, those dramatic moments, to the point where when he dies, when he stabs himself, it's a little bit more oomph, because you just saw things that really attached you to him, instead of still
Yeah.
living off the things you saw 3 years ago. But what are your thoughts on that? Him kind of going out this season, and would more have made it work a little bit better for you, or did it work pretty well for you as it is?
Yeah, I mean, I kinda go back and forth on this because, like you said, this is a show that we know what it could have been even more, and what it is, like, genuinely fantastic. It's such a conundrum. It's not quite paradox, but it's definitely something that, like, in, like, 5 years, maybe it'll eat at me a bit more if, like, someone does, like, a perfect, like, novel to fit in between some of this or something, right? Like,
Yeah.
and I'd love that. I'd love for, like, a Gilroy to consult and, like, give some script ideas for a writer to kinda flesh out stuff for these characters and be, like, more Luthen and Clea focused, and bam, you can bridge to what we do see in the show, and I just don't trust any level of Star Wars to leave, like, this almost vague but more vibe-based backstory for Luthen just purely alone. It's just there's gonna be some connectivity, some explanation, but yeah, like, the way he died too, right? Like, it's nice that he goes out by his own hand, basically, and then his extended hand, right? Like, what he's allowed himself, like, the cocoons that he lives within. But it's also such a logistical thing because you can definitely feel why these episodes they're they're shorter. They're just genuinely just shorter than the last arc, but you're like, "Oh, but why?" I'm seeing U-wings flying around through Coruscant and all that. You're seeing, like, them really pushing as much as they could. Like, you can tell when they even use the volume in this, especially in the Naboo shots, because you could just tell, like, just some of the curvature of the actual place and the background of that would have been just pure CGI. Like, it was hard for them. Again, I nobody has touched season 1 Greg Fraser Mandalorian, right, in season 2. That he's untouchable there. He continued on into Batman. Everybody else that's tried with the volume, no matter how little you're using it, no matter how well you're using it, how you're blending with other technology, nobody's really hit that. But this is a show that, especially in this last arc, try to be a little bit more like, "Hey, we're about to enter, like, the more generally known spheres of Star Wars. This is a bigger show, like, let's fill it out." So stuff like seeing Luthen, like, have his big moment, but then also be like, "Oh, here's some elevator music with this little grandma alien," that's like, you have to kinda lean a little bit more into some of that humor and just some of these bigger shots with, like, the buildings that they're in and all that. Like, it's just like, damn, okay, like, we're elevating, we're escalating. Where's the space for the guy that used to carry the show with just his voice? Right? Like, not much, right? So you have to have him not just kill himself that way, but have it be like an engineered death that he knows he'll be on this level basically in this building. This is the equipment they're gonna use. This is the things you need to get breakthrough, right, and unlock through everything. You just have to get a couple of artificial aesthetic things, and then you'll blend in and do whatever you need to do, Clea. But this is the end, and this is what has to be done if I'm not dead, right? Like that's insane, right? It shouldn't really work in a world of trillions of people and just the level of detail that the ISB has been shown to really accumulate in throughout the show, but it works because it's so artistically done. You get the flashbacks that tie into what Clea is doing, what she's trying to send out, what she's gotta finish, or, like, seeing all that kinda blended together, you're like, "Ah, he kinda went away so gently in the way that made most sense for him with by his hand, by his control, without a clear hero or villain or necessary evil side to him," right? He was just Luthen, and that's a complicated bag of emotions, right? So I liked it, I really do, but like you said, I want to know more about the character and why he felt like he slipped, and then he was able to just snap back into it in this episode of all things, right? Relying on a backstory is great for time saving. Would it have hit a little harder if I had, like, another extra arc for this season that you could kinda bridge a proper, 2 to 1 BBY and then the 1 to 0 BBYs, all Rogue One stuff like that final episode, yeah,
Mhm.
probably. Honestly, I think that could have been just enough to, like, really make it flow and blend for me. Um, but yeah, it is a necessary evil, I guess, with this also being a massively expensive even when it finally did come to do even more common Star Wars technology and imagery, they were still like, "Hey, but we're still doing all these practical sets, all these uniforms, everything." I know, especially those last 3 episodes, how short they are, like, they were blowing their budget, and they were flexing. They were deep faking so much of Diego Luna in some shots, like, but if you look at, like, out of a lot of his side angles, it looked like him, like, in the last arc. But anything that was front on that you have him, like, kinda stare like that first time Clea looks at him, that's just shot basically out of Rogue One. There's no sign of current day Diego Luna in that, like, and he's aged extremely well, right? Like, the money being thrown here, I get it, alright? It was fantastic. It makes the spectacle of it all, the weight, the amplification, awesome, right? And then you have Krennic also stepping in to do all these awesome monologues and really take charge of a lot of the scenes to raise the stakes. You're like, "Okay, I can almost live with Luthen not being here because he's a limited line and he's not." Do I wish that we had a few more episodes? Absolutely, absolutely. It's just when you do it this well, execution sometimes matters, and they execute.
No, for sure. And I think it's really all one of those things of like leave them wanting more. That's like
Yeah,
kind of the mantra of
exactly.
season
Yeah.
2 is it's so good that you definitely want more. It's hard to imagine this being done now, but obviously we know there's nowhere else to go. And I think as a Cassian story, it's hard to imagine too much more for Cassian. I think
Yeah.
and honestly, I'm surprised because I was a little trepidatious coming into the season prior to the reviews coming out of like, okay, we've got Cyril, we've got Dedra, we've got Luthen, we got Saw, we've got Cassian, we got Bix. We have all these characters from season one, which took 12 episodes to focus on all of them. How are we going to do that when we're jumping 3 year or a year each time every 3 episodes? Like, how are we going to fit all this stuff? And then on top of that, like Wilmon got a bigger role this season. A
Yeah.
lot of other characters got bigger roles this season. And so how are we gonna do that? And to my shock, honestly, this show did a fantastic job with, to me, almost every one of those characters. Like, I thought Dedra's arc was extremely satisfying. I liked Cyril so much by the time he died. I thought that was so much better. And so or not better, but, like, built on season 1 because I didn't really like him much in season 1. They're purposely making you kind of find him insufferable, and then season 2, he works a lot better. Everybody it worked great for. I think Luthen's just the one that's so shrouded in mystery that it would have been he's the one that still when the show ends, I'm left going, "I'm sad he died because he's been a big part of the show. I like Stellan Skarsgård and everything he's in, and he's a interesting, compelling character, but do I have the emotional reaction that I would have had we had another arc with Luthen or had him be one of the main characters of the arcs like Dedra and Cyril were this arc or this season, or like Cassian is every episode, like if we had a little bit more time with Luthen. But that's definitely something a book or something could rectify. And I don't think it's necessarily an issue of the show. I think it's just he's the one that falls by the wayside a little bit. But again, he's supposed to be the distant character. And so it's kind of one of those conundrums where you understand where they're going for, but you're selfishly want a little bit more. Let's wrap up our discussion here. So we're going to give the show our official score that of course is subject to change whenever we want it to change in the future. But as of now, as of what, an hour removed from finishing Andor season 2, first watches of all these episodes. I obviously haven't got to rewatch these episodes, but I've rewatched a lot of the episodes of season 2 at least once, so two showings for most of them, except these last 3. We're gonna give it a score for Andor season 2. Seneca, I'll have you give it a score out of 5, and then also Andor as a show, a score out of 5, and then we'll move on to your guys' questions and comments. So keep sending them into the chat, and we'll get to them right after this.
It is too tough. Almost a 5 feels wrong. Like I wanna do it out of 10, but then
You can do it out of
comes
10
down
if
to
you want.
4. Just, it's fantastic, absolutely a fantastic season, right? And I think I almost have to go with the out of 10 scale just because I feel like the season's a 9 out of 10, right? I can't but as a show, is it might be a little closer to well, no, actually, I wouldn't even give this season a 9 out of I'd give this a 9.5, and then, it almost feels like I can't tell if I'd wanna say Andor season 1's a 10 anymore for me, especially after a rewatch leading into this. It used to feel like that because it was just sitting alone, and now it has, like, a companion that should be vastly different, has a lot more flaws in its logic because you're like, "How are you gonna process all of that deliberate work of Andor season 1 into a season 2 that's leading into the pipeline that is Rogue One that you have to escalate to?" And they did it. And, yeah, I have, like, issues here and there. I can't say that first arc is anything fantastic, right? But it was a nice almost entry point into Andor the same way season 1's first arc of Andor was, so I was like, "Okay." It did so much so similarly to season 1, so much so differently, and there was things like you said, I was left wanting a little bit more, but such strong choices throughout, execution in the scenes that absolutely mattered, surprise performances like Mendelsohn just absolutely chewing up as Krennic in a way that I didn't even really think he had in Rogue One, and I love how it bridges like, there's just things that just work for me, like the Rhydonium scene with Wilmot and Saw, like none of that works if this was a traditional season 2. Not
Mhm.
at all. But it there were moments this season that made me feel like, "Oh, this is like I'm back in George Lucas Star Wars," because it took those swings, and it just absolutely was like, if I can't land on something plot relevant, I'm gonna land on something thematic or something symbolic or something that just pulls at you. And I think that's what makes this such a tough 9.5 for me. Just like it shouldn't work. It's gonna be so weird binging season 1 to season 2 at some point in my life and probably entering into Rogue One. Like it will feel so stylistically wrong, but it's gonna just be such a great experience and it'll be so fulfilling at the same time. So as a show as a whole, I will say 9. I am actually gonna give the crown to the season over season 1. I will give it a 9.5, make season 1 a 9 now, and yeah, it's just, ugh, such a good show, such a good show.
Yeah, I have a very similar thought to you about this whole thing. It's like I gotta rewatch season 1 now with season 2, like, as a
Yeah,
full binge because it's one of those things that I think just works so well together, it's almost hard to separate the 2 now. They're more separated by style rather than by content. And so it's a really difficult decision to see and pick which one you like more. I mean, I can't remember what I gave season 1 when it came out 3 years ago. But I think now I would say it's probably a 4.5 for me, and I feel like that's what I gave it back then, a 9, 4.5, same score. So I was gonna give season 2 the same thing. It's very difficult for me to give a 5 out of 5. Just if anybody and nobody here probably is on my letterbox besides Sanak, but I don't give 5 out of 5s, like, ever. And
no,
so it's very difficult for me to when I see something for the first time, be like, "Yes, 5 out of 5." 'Cause I feel like that's a sacred rating. So I'm not gonna give
yeah,
it a 5 out of 5 right now. I'm gonna give it a 4.5 out of 5. Definitely subject to changing in the future, but this is easily the best Disney Star Wars show. It's right there with Clone Wars as my favorite Star Wars shows. It's definitely objectively better than Clone Wars. Clone Wars has 7 seasons, and I grew up with it, so it's gonna have a stronger place in my heart. Also has the characters that, grew up loving since I was 5. So, it's very 2 very different types of things, impossible to compare the 2. But this is the best thing Disney has made with Star Wars. I think coupling it to Rogue One, which is my favorite Disney Star Wars movie, makes it even stronger because now you've got what I have felt has been one of their best movies now with their best show as like one cohesive piece of Star Wars storytelling. It's almost crazy to think that like that's, and we talked a lot how Disney has done so well with the Dark Times era that that's where they seem to be the most comfortable. It's the bridge between the prequels and the original trilogy, so you get to kind of mess around with stuff from both eras and combine it. It's also an era that, because Legends only had 7 years after Revenge of the
Yeah.
Sith came out to mess with that time period before Disney acquired Star Wars. It doesn't have as much competition from the Legends side. So Disney's just, they've really nailed and mastered that time period between Andor and Rogue One and Rebels, and a lot of the great books they've written and comics from that time period. There's just been such great development for the Dark Times period in this era. And I think having the seminal 1-2 punch of Disney making theatrical and Disney Plus like the centerpieces of Star Wars, and you have the 1-2 punch of Andor, their best show, and to me, Rogue One, their best film, both together, I think is a pretty awesome thing. So for me, it's the best thing they've made. It's the best Star Wars thing since at least the Clone Wars for me, and on film. So I love this season. I would give it a 4.5 right now. Definitely reserving the right to change it to a 5 the more and more I fall in love with this over time, because that's really what it takes for Star Wars with something that means so much to all of us. It takes that time to truly embrace it as a piece of this franchise we love so much, right? So with time, it could be a 5, but for me, the show Andor as a whole and season 2 would be a 4.5. I really loved it. I thought it was fantastic. What did you guys think of Andor season 2 and Andor as a show as a whole right now? A bunch of people have voted in the poll that I put up, and 85% say they would give Andor season 2 a 5-star rating. 13% say a 4-star rating, and 2% say a 3-star rating. Nobody would give it below a 3-star rating. I think that's pretty representative of how people feel about Andor season 2. It is certainly an excellent season, definitely a classic of Star Wars now, and very fun to talk about this. Unfortunately, it has come to an end, but we're going to enjoy the next hour and a half or so we have with you guys to continue talking about Andor season 2 before we end up wrapping up our Andor coverage for, I guess, the entirety of the show's run, which is so sad to think about. All right, let's start at the top here with Batasai, the Manslayer says, "Hey guys, good to see you. Second season is really a companion piece to Rogue One. The show was nearly perfect. I would say that to compress everything in 2 seasons had its demerits, particularly for Luthen, his relationship with the Rebellion, Cassian, and certainly to have more with Clea in flashbacks. She consolidates as a great character with this show and these episodes. Particularly sorry to bring it again, but the recast is an unfortunate stench on the show. The body of Benjamin Bratt is so unlike Smith's. Also, the characterization. Yeah. Okay, let's talk about the first thing with Luthen, because we talked about it a little bit already. I'm on a similar page as you, Batasai. Like, I think the structure of the show definitely leaves certain things that stand out as like, oh, that's kind of a missed opportunity or could have been a little bit better. And for sure, to me, Luthen is that thing. Um, I don't think it really detracts from the show as a whole, but I think it detracts from some of the Luthen centric moments. Now, I think one of the brilliant things the show did was not just with like making him a distant character, but they did so much work for Clea this season that you see the death of Luthen via Clea, and that almost makes it work better because you're so distant from Luthen this season. He's not necessarily present. So it almost works better because of that. Whereas if they would have made it this moment where like Luthen stabs himself and he's having a flashback as he's like going comatose or something, and he's remembering these moments that built him into who he was. I don't know if it hits home as much as it hits home when it's going through Clea and you know what she's going to have to do, you know what it means to her. So I think overall the scene, all of it works really well. But I just Luthen is such an interesting character, and like you're saying, the scenes with the rebellion, the way they don't like him. I mean, Cassian brings up a good point. He's like, "Do any of you know him? Nobody knows him except Mon Mothma, and she's the one that's like kind of wants Cassian to, she wants to believe Cassian, and she wants to stick up for Cassian, but she also has had her problems with Luthen, but she knows she wouldn't be there without Luthen. And so there's this like weird debt that she owes him and he owes her debts. And it's a great relationship. But yeah, I think like I said earlier, the idealism of Bale, the idealism that he presents onto the rest of the rebellion as this group of people that would much rather talk than do anything. I think that's inherent in the relationship and the battle between Luthen and Bale and the rest of the council. But I would have loved to see it, or at least see one scene of Luthen on Yavin arguing with them before he went out.
Yeah, yeah. Uh, but I mean, as much as I even agree with that, I'd even maybe, like, pull back a little bit, like, it's nice that he doesn't go to Yavin, right? For him to at least even see, like, the beginning of the realization of everything he worked for, almost feels like he'd hate it. He'd absolutely be like, "I don't want this," right? This is not like, it's like anytime, like, anybody becomes, like, a influencer, celebrity, any period of time, they'll start to grow to hate some of, like, their like, newer fans and all this and that, right? Like, and what they look like compared to him, even though they claim to be of the same message or, like, yeah, I can absolutely see him being pretentious. He's a antique stealer after all, right? Like,
Yeah,
it is like, and it's such an interesting scene too with him and Dedra where it's like, what is a replica, what is real, what isn't, right? And then, like, that's the question. Like, that is who he is too, right? How much of that guy is that real character? Is that who he is, or is it a mask that he's been portraying? Is he switch on and off, right? And then do you get any real clarification from his backstory? No, you get a better understanding of the layers to him. But yeah, like, I was kinda happy of he didn't go to Yavin, right? Like, I would've loved him to communicate via with Mon Mothma or somebody else that is on that Yavin council, but I'm kinda glad he didn't go to Yavin, right? I would hate for him to see his dreams, like, and especially after that monologue where he's like, "I'm doomed." Like, I like that he didn't get to see that. But absolutely agree, otherwise, like, yeah, he is a character that we kinda lose out on. Like Liam said, I do like it's good that even though he's a character that even if this was a 3-season or a 5-season show, he was gonna slip away like this. His final scenes were not gonna be him driving it. I never believed that. That was kinda the whole point that he will be forgotten, and the fact that you see you and you're left with this gray area between the antique man and the man that we see interact with Cassian, and that it just you'll never get a full understanding of this guy who is undoubtedly the roots of this rebellion, but nobody will ever see it. I think it works so well. Again, I don't know if we need another season. It's just another episode even.
yeah.
I wouldn't even mind like another extra episode to just make this a little bit more jumbo, to give a couple cameos to like General Merrick and all that, because you could really tell they were straining with the budget with, well, after Gorman and then with this was a very expensive set of episodes. 6 straight episodes looking like this is absolutely fantastic, but it was gonna be hard even with all the sets that they've had from season 1, right? So it's just yeah, it's a weird thing. I really do get that, but I do like how he's handled at the end. I just wish there was a little bit more, and maybe that's the whole point of the character.
Batasai also says, particularly sorry to bring it up again, but the recast is such an unfortunate stench on the show. The body of Brat is so unlike Smith's. Also, the characterization in Yavin was new in Bale. In any case, those scenes in Yavin with Saw, Draven, and the others, part of Gas is dynamic with Krennic and his end. The ISB, so much of the bureaucracy of the Empire was fleshed out in the show, and the power in the Imperial designs and uniforms, armors, etc. Really great. Here was and his white uniform and armor on top of it with the black hat looks so great. So that's it for me. I don't know how they were able to get Jimmy. Seems that everything was at most a day or two of shooting, if not. But man, Krennic was really good. Okay, so let's talk about Jimmy Smits again, because when we originally talked about the news that Gilroy broke himself in an interview about the fact that they were recasting a legacy character because of specific important scenes on Yavin. That's what he said. And that kind of made everybody speculate possibly Bail Organa. And then the rumors and the leaks were out there that it was Benjamin Bratt as Bail Organa. I think it's again one of those things that, like, yeah, you watch the show and you're like, okay, Bale doesn't have any specific moment that you're not like, man, if they could have just had Jimmy or waited for Jimmy. But that's just not how things work when you're doing scenes with groups of people and one-on-one scenes particularly. You can't wait for one actor when you're paying for these sets, these locations. You've got all these moving pieces. I urge you, I guess, if you haven't seen the Phantom Menace making of documentary, which is one of my favorite behind the scenes documentaries of any film, but you can watch it for free on YouTube. I've seen it maybe 10 times or more. Used to watch it all the time growing up. But watch that and just see how many moving pieces there are. If you want some grasp on how many moving pieces there are on a film set and how everything is so tightly scheduled, because it's hard to really grasp that until you're there, until you're on one. These decisions that have to be made because of those moments. Now, I still
Yeah.
stand by what I said before, wherein like we're in the age of CGIing people in and out of scenes all the time. You have trailers where people are added to the scenes who aren't there because they died earlier on in the movie or something, or you have scenes in films where you could most of the time you can kind of tell, but you could tell actors weren't on stage together filming these scenes. So I still stand by scenes like the Senate stuff with Bale, where he's in the pod, like that type of stuff. You could have had Jimmy Smits come in and green screen for a day. But if you're on this gigantic Yavin 4 set that you built and you need these actors moving through the scene, I don't blame them for needing to recast for certain types of moments. You have like these things aren't just easy to just put back. And yeah, they could have CGI'd him into all these moments. But again, this type of show with this type of weight and these types of emotional conversations, it's much harder to do that by CGIing somebody back in to a scene, putting them on a green screen and putting them back into a scene versus having them there for both actors. So I think it's definitely something that's difficult. Could they have written Bale out of the show completely? Maybe. They might have been able to do that, and I don't know if it would have changed much. I think that's a great last scene with him and Cassian that I really, really liked. And I do like seeing the weight of the world on his shoulders through these these last few episodes, seeing him now embracing that role as leader of the rebellion, like even more so than Mon Mothma. She might be the figurehead, the one who's making the speeches, but it looks like Bale really has embraced that role of like the guy in charge, and I like seeing that side of him. So there are a lot of great moments, and maybe I just got used to. I was prepared for it before the show. I got used to it during the show, but I was kind of okay with it by the end. It's like when you have these types of things, it's kind of it's a weird conundrum, right? Because you have the part of your brain that's like, well, this is a small enough role to where maybe they should have just not done it at all. But then there's also the other part of your brain that's like, this is a small enough role to where like I'll just kind of let it pass because it's not like they made a Bail Organa movie and we're like, well, Jimmy Smits wasn't available, so we just recast him. Like, it's not like they had a giant role for the character and got rid of him, right? He's a small, minor role. So it's a difficult one, but I don't blame you, Bad aside. For that's there's still a part of my brain that like doesn't necessarily see him as the Bail Organa that we've known forever. But the show was good enough and his moments were good enough that I definitely already have kind of let it slide in my mind.
Yeah, and honestly, I still think there could have been a little bit nicer effort just kinda looking at some of the shots of Bale in Rogue One wearing the same Yavin outfit as we see
Yeah,
here with Benjamin Bratt, like, his looks just like, he looks skinny in that. That thing just need a little bit of
I agree
poofiness.
with that.
It looks way more worn out. So you're telling me that I guess maybe Bale didn't take a shower in that one day, and that's just what happens or something, like, I mean, it's it's not something you should think about. It's a suspension of disbelief that is essential to watching anything, but we've managed to kind of cut corners and live in gray areas a lot with Star Wars because it's always been pushing technology at the forefront of filmmaking, right? Like, that's just so embedded into the DNA of this franchise because that's what George Lucas was actually even more involved with than anything else, right? Once this became such a huge hit from the original film, right? He didn't become the filmmaker that he thought he'd be. He became an incredibly big filmmaker, but not in the way he'd expected, right? So yeah, when I see stuff like this, I'm like, "Oh, just a few years back with Endgame, we've got face doubles, people are always." But then I think about the logistics there, like, who are the characters that can kind of be put in there without not really looking like they're there? Oh, the Hulk or, someone wearing a suit of armor like the Black Panther or something, like, you can do those things. Like, so much of the Spider-Man stuff, people complain about, like, too much of the CGI suit, but with Holland's schedule and everything, that's the only reason it works. Right? And that's what you can suspend some of that disbelief because there's, like, just a couple of shots that you really have to spend time on. And then we have a TV show, right? And a TV show that I love it to death, but it was definitely straining itself trying to make it this good, right? Like, it's not like like, we were really pleased we could put polish on everything. There are things I would have polished in that last arc. Like I said, that Naboo volume shots, there's some shots of them with Lonnie and Luthen when they're sitting, you can almost tell the curvature of the volume is starting to affect just some of the angles. But at the same time, I'm like, it's okay, it's fine, right? And I did like I really did like Benjamin Bratt by the end here. I think they almost with a little bit of that hair coloring and just the graininess that they kinda chose to go with, I I think they almost made him look a little closer, just looking at it compared to how he was in the last arc, and then this his little cameo. He doesn't look exactly like that anymore, so it looks like he's well on his way. It just so happens to be the very next day is when Jimmy Smits is gonna show up, right? So it's like, okay, so but no, I really thought he commanded it well. I know you kinda got this criticism here of, like, how new his characterization is. I don't know. I don't think it's new. I think it's just this is the thing we all expected, nuance, right? He doesn't have time for nuance in the prequels. It's all operatic, it's all stage play. Anytime you see anything with the senators and not just the senators with the Senate pods, like just out and about or talking with the chancellor. It's a group of people sitting and talking. You gotta explain enough about the plot, enough details that are important to the viewer, and then get moving along to the stuff that captures more the mythical quality of Star Wars, right? This is not a show that leans on that. It leans on the grays. It leans on all the stuff in between, on the stuff that doesn't seemingly matter in the grand scope of things, but is just as important as is the philosophy of Star Wars, right? So it chooses to lean way more into the stuff that's a lot closer to your face, and I think it works well here with Benjamin Bratt kinda taking the role because, yeah, he is still that idealistic good senator with the Jedi friends, with the secret about Leia, knowing all this other stuff, but at the same time, because of things he's done here and all that, I can see why he's gonna be critical of Luthen because he's never been in the very grimy weirdness that that guy operates in. Obviously, it would help to know why Bill's a little bit more opposed to him than just, a couple lines there. Not gonna discredit that, but I get why he would be the skeptic. But then once everybody builds a case, you're like, "Oh my god, he is a politician." At the end of the day, his brain has to think about, "How can you convince me? How can I be convinced?" I mean, that's literally a scene with Genevieve O'Reilly, when she's playing Mon Mothma. She's talking to Vel, she's like, "I need you to convince me of something I want to believe." That's literally the whole point there, and then once Mon brings it up, it's a colleague, it's someone that he's trusted it with this much of his life, who's seen and who's been a bridge hold and then you see that guy that you see in Revenge of the Sith and Attack of the Clones and Kenobi and all that. You see that guy in Rogue One, and you're like, "Ah, he is a little bit more like, tonally rich." But when it comes to it, the essence, I think Benjamin definitely nailed here. Absolutely nailed here. He added a new layer that I really liked about in the last arc when he's like, "I gotta stay behind. One of us has to." Like, I like that. That's something that Mask of Fear, imagining Jimmy Smits he would have done, worked for me there. Seeing this on Yavin, yeah, it doesn't work so well. Oh man, that only makes it look like why is he so against Diego Luna's Cassian scenes? And I was, and you're seeing him deep fake. You're like, why not that? It does cause a little bit of a weird like, like milkshake in your brain, just everything kind of mixed about. You're like, it just doesn't feel right, but it is right. You understand it, but you don't want it to understand it. And then he says that final like scene and says, "Miss, may the force be with you." And I'm like, okay, like that works for me. So again, at the end of the day, if it doesn't work with your suspension of disbelief, especially with this very tech forward franchise, I understand. But I'm happy enough with it. I just think my bigger issue is just not using costuming to effect. No one's saying wear a fat suit or anything. They're saying puff it up a little bit more, put a couple extra layers. That's a very necessary part improvising to make things look as close as possible when you have to like shoot with like a stunt double or someone's hand for a certain scene that original actor stuff like that happens. So, I just expected the show to be a little bit better about it with Benjamin Bratt, but I guess they were like, "Bail's not that important, right?" Well, we're not for the prequel fans at least, I'll say that.
Yeah, I'd still completely agree with that point, and I did feel like this costume for sure, because Benjamin Bratt has kind of a longer neck,
Yeah,
especially compared to Jimmy Smith, so it, like, makes him look even skinnier. It just his the last costume in the Senate, I thought looked great. Like, if that's the type of costume and his look in that scene was the type of moment where you could, like, squint your eyes and see Jimmy Smith's type of thing because it physically kinda looked like him. And they shot him in very imposing ways where you see him standing next to Maud and he looks so much more dominating. There were a lot of
yeah,
scenes like that in the last arc. In this arc, you see a lot of him sitting down. He's wearing little more tightly fitting clothing, doesn't have the big shoulder pads. So he did look skinny again, like he did in that first time we saw him in that episode. Was it 5 or 6
yeah,
of the second arc? So yeah, I completely still agree with that. They definitely could have made his costumes have some more padding. They could have given him the physical traits that look a little bit more like Jimmy Smith's, and I think that would have worked a little bit better for that character. They didn't. I still think thematically his scenes were rich enough to have him in the show, and small enough to where it won't be one of those things that bothers me forever. Uh, but yeah, it's still always going to be unfortunate, especially when you have an actor who's still alive and capable. It's always gonna be unfortunate to not have them. And it's also kind of a surprise they went that direction, right? And we still got no Tarkin or anything in this season.
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
they didn't go and broach that conundrum, and I wonder how much that has to do with maybe the lawsuit stuff that was going on, even though it was kind of a minor story last year, but there was the lawsuit stuff around the Tarkin deepfake and certain companies kinda claiming they had ownership of the Peter Cushing estate and all that. So I don't know. Maybe that's part of it, but they didn't broach that either. But that kind of segues us into the Krennic conversation because Battlesai was talking about Krennic as well. And yeah, I want to talk about Krennic too because I thought Ben Mendelsohn would be a little bigger part of this show, especially when you have him in the first episode of season 2, right? I was like, okay, here we go. We're getting like a Krennic season. Like he's going to be a part of all the
mhm,
different things that the ISB is doing. He's going to be kind of this go between the Death Star project and the ISB and Dedra's going to be involved, all this stuff. And you don't get him very often. You get him sparingly, and he is incredibly menacing this entire show. I think Gilroy did a great job of elevating his level of menace because in Rogue One, he's certainly you see him as this kind of cranky subservient. He's not as good as or as powerful as or as intimidating as Tarkin. And then he goes to Vader and he's kind of whining about Tarkin stole my project and he immediately gets choked out by Vader. So he's this kind of guy that you just don't really see how powerful he is, at least in terms of stature and position in the Empire in Rogue One, and especially with like a title like director, we don't really know where that lies in the military hierarchy, right? When you hear that title, when you originally get in Rogue One, as opposed to Grand Moff or Darth Vader or Admiral or whatever you want to compare it to. So I like that they gave him so much power and so much sway here. He kind of plays almost the Tarkin role from Rogue One, but in this season where he's used sparingly, but the moments he's there, it's like he's commanding the screen. And I thought Mendelsohn was fantastic. I loved his interrogation scene with Dedra. I thought that was so, so good, and it utilized a lot of the, like, best Ben Mendelsohnisms on top of making him really scary. And I love that Partagas would rather shoot himself than talk to Krennic and be interrogated by Krennic and face the failures that he let the ISB have amongst this show. Like, there's so many things that just took Krennic to me a step up without even really having him on screen. You've got
Yeah,
that
yeah.
air of just complete dominance that you don't get in Rogue One. And even though he's a compelling, interesting Imperial in Rogue One, and I read Catalyst before I saw Rogue One, and he has a big role in that, and I liked him and his climb through the Imperial ranks in that story. Just seeing how scary he is in this season, I thought it was all so well written, and Mendelsohn really brought it in every scene he was in.
Yeah, I think the first thing I ever remember watching him in was in this Netflix show called Bloodline.
Yeah.
And anybody remembers watching it, that first season was fantastic. And then I watched a little bit of season 2. I think it had 3 seasons, but by the end, people were like, "This is just not good. It's just not the same anymore." But yeah, season 1 of him, just seeing him in command of that performance, seeing all the Ben Mendelisms, I'm like, let's just say when all the casting was happening around The Force Awakens and Rogue One, I was watching a lot of their stuff at that time, and I was like, "Yes, this guy," and it was just crazy seeing especially The Force Awakens, just seeing how many of those actors I'd seen, like, their breakout thing or, like, the thing that had elevated them and wanting them in Star Wars and suddenly being like, "Oh my god, they're in Star Wars," right? Like, it was awesome, and I had that with him, and it was just yeah, it was fantastic kinda getting to watch him and then see that season and then go home and for winter break in college and see him on screen as Director Krennic and after Lost Stars and everything, just like, yeah, like, there was just so many cool things that you could feel were being built up. Sorry, not was he in Lost Stars? I think he had maybe one, but maybe not. It might have been he was in Thrawn for sure, right? I think at one point, yeah,
Mhm.
so yeah, I mean, he's had all these different transitions into the character, that were, like, intimidating and scary and cool, and then you see what he is in Rogue One, you're like, "That was fantastic." But I didn't get that bloodline Ben, right? And I was like, "Ah," like, the thing that just makes you feel like, "Oh my god," he's, like, snarling at you and all that. There was something that I there's a physicality that he carried himself with, but it was more frantic, and you can understand that energy, especially with, like, him leaving Dedra and like, "Of course, Luke is dead now, like, my timeline accelerated. I'm already running behind." You can feel why he's maybe on edge more and why Tarkin can so easily, like, step over him. Again, another episode, and this would have made it all that stuff, the logistical stuff you have to connect to Rogue One, would his dialogue feel richer, more detailed, and not feeling like, "Hey, here's plot delivered right now." But yeah, I think the moment you see him yeah, he's behind Dedra, it's intimidating, whatever. We've seen Vader do that. And then he sticks his finger down on her skull, and she just, like, feels like she's being drilled into. You hear, like, the score change too. Oh, and I was like, "That's Ben right there. That's the Krennic that I've been asking for." And, like, I liked what we got. Don't get me wrong, when his, little speech to the whole Gorman planning committee and all that. It was all good, but seeing him flick off all the lights and the audio recording devices, go inside and just deliver on her and then when she's like, "No, no, I was always trying to do my part," just, like, holding her head and just putting her down by her head. Nobody does that, but it just works so well with the character. It works with that whole, like, blue collar working class energy that he kinda carries around next to a Tarkin who's more posh, military school brat, but with good money and family and all that, right? That's always been kind of their dynamic, and, that's as a person who's not read Catalyst saying that, I know you probably have even more to add to that, but now seeing that just be fully embodied and the way, like, he's working with Partagas and how they're talking and all that, it just Dedra, stop asking these dumb questions. "Why do you think I'm here?" Like, don't disrespect like that. I thought I was like, "Yes." Just the way he was just, like, digging into her, like and mind you, this is a character that I think, again, another episode would have helped, right? Like, just to have some bridge between Cyril's death and those, like, moments that she had. 'Cause you almost hear her talk about, like, "I'm a scavenger." That's exactly why I was looking up at the Death Star stuff. It landed in my inbox, and I just let it pile up and all that, right? Like, and you're like, "Wow, that's kind of how it was for her love with Cyril." He's not an ideal candidate for someone in her position, but it worked. She took what she had, her backstory, blah, blah, blah. It's just it's the writing is good, the delivery is good. You're like, "Okay, it works so well for me," but I'm like, "Where's that bridge?" Right? And finally seeing that bridge with that Krennic that has been there for years for me with all this extended material and seeing Ben Mendelsohn from Bloodline come to life, I was like, "Yes, yes." And it's such a treat, especially after how Secret Invasion just butchered everything about everything, character, story, and killing off his character. Oh, spoiler. I mean, nobody cares. Secret Invasion was just bad. But, yeah, just seeing that and a character that he had richness to that I thought he could have had fun with, be a little bit more of his humor side, but still keep growing into, how that was wasted, but then seeing how something that I felt like, he did pretty good in Rogue One, seeing how it's just how much richer it is, like, I now see those scenes that were, like, in those trailers of, like, him holding the gun and just looking down at, like, the orbital behind him, like, there are so many cool shots of so many characters from Rogue One that might have been from the Garrett Edwards cut of this, or from deleted scenes and all that, but he carried so much energy there that what we saw in the film was like, it's not disappointing, it's just surprising that they went this way. And then now I finally got it. Absolutely, Ben Mendelsohn, I loved seeing him. I think honestly for me, I was happy with how much it was shown. I didn't really expect more. I only really expected this arc, and maybe a little sparse stuff here and there, so I was happy with that. I think it works for me because for him, he's like, "This is a side quest, Dedra, that has blown up the entire domino stand," right? Like, this was not supposed to happen. This was supposed to be isolated. If there were things important, you could connect and prick them together. Now you're telling me this guy, Lonnie, has had your code that you probably didn't change your password or something, and he's been checking everything for months and then logged in 3 hours before his death. Like, Dedra, what have you unleashed? And then seeing her after that whole performance from Ben Mendelsohn in basically Narkina 5 herself, and you're like, yeah, yeah, that's the Krennic I expected to see, and it was fully realized today. Took a little longer than I wanted, but that's the Ben Mendelsohn effect, and that's the character I think fully realized, and I'm glad Gilroy got another swing at him. I don't think he probably had too many changes other for that character other than, like, how his death was handled, with how all the rumors of Rogue One being reshot was mostly with the 3rd act. So, seeing that he probably finally got a chance to, like, play with the character and the intentions of the character and how it fit in after everything was kinda changed around, I think he finally got to bring everything that he hoped Rogue One could carry for that character, but just maybe didn't quite get there.
Yeah, just the fact check about the appearance as well. He was in Lost Stars, but indirectly, he
Yeah, yeah,
wasn't
that
named. And then he was in Thrawn Treason, and he was in Leia, Princess of Alderaan. Those were
yeah.
his most of his book appearances, besides obviously Catalyst. But yeah, completely agree with pretty much everything you said. I just loved seeing him. I mean, obviously, also elevates Tarkin to another level and Vader to another level when you see this powerful guy. He like makes the one of the directors of the ISB kill himself because of how scary
Yeah,
he is,
yeah,
and the rest of the interrogation team and the higher up realms of the Empire are, and he is subservient to Tarkin. So like it shows even the levels of that too. So it's great. I loved his scenes. I thought he was great in every moment he was in. Like the art scene as well in the second arc. That was all fantastic too. He was so menacing in this show. So much more menacing than he was in Rogue One. So it's nice seeing that kind of come full circle. So really loved that. Mrs. Mandarin says, "Hey, what's up? Can't stay in a different time zone. Have to go to sleep. But great writing, storyline, actors, dialogue, live set, CGI, etc. But I'm still mad there was no Palpatine or Leia. I still like season one better. Like Sade said, nothing as good as the first time. I enjoyed the mystery. My favorite moments of the finale were K2, SO, Dedra, and finding Luthen, and then Luthen sacrificing himself. But moment of season two was Saw Gerrera's introduction, Mon Mothma's daughter's wedding, and the speech at the Senate in episode 9. Still can't compare to season one, The Eye, and all three episodes of Narkina 5 and The Reckoning. But Yeah, well, all the great thoughts there. Completely agree about the writing, storyline, actors, all that stuff. As for Palpatine and Leia, I selfishly wanted to see Palpatine just because I love Palpatine so much. But I think taking the A New Hope strategy with Palpatine and basically making him larger than larger than the show. Like as good as the show is, and as much as it leads into some of the biggest moments, the show still kind of knows what it is, and it still keeps the narrative and the show itself at a level that's still slightly underneath what the biggest moments in Star Wars are. Like if you want to say Rogue One, even though it's not a Skywalker saga movie, is basically at that level because it's about stealing the plans for the Death Star, or just slightly below that, then Andor, in terms of importance, is like slightly below that. And it does that with its characters. It doesn't take Palpatine, it leaves him as this shadow that looms large. I mean, even somebody like Krennic, if you're going to say main villain of Rogue One, he's even this kind of floating figure that's bigger than the events of Andor, until ultimately the events of Andor lead into those big moments in the films, right? So he's even kind of big for this show. So I kind of like that, the way they approached it. No Tarkin, no Palpatine, none of the big guns from the Empire. Like they're still treating Andor and the events of Andor and the rebellion building in Andor as this thing that's just kind of far off, while the more boots on the ground Imperials are dealing with this problem and seeing how it's rising and flourishing, and it's going to become a problem now for these higher ups. And so I thought that was well done. So selfishly wanted Palpatine because I love Palpatine and love Ian McDermott, and I kind of wanted to see how he played a Palpatine in the dark times, but that's okay. As for Leia, I think it makes sense. I would have loved to see her still, but it's just so close to A New Hope that it just comes with that like added baggage of, it's one thing to recast Bail Organa, it's another thing to recast Princess Leia. And so if you cast somebody random as Leia, which is one of the main reasons I think they CGI faced her in Rogue One, it's like, are they beholden to that person for future stories if they wanted to do recast? Like the same problem they're kind of having with Alden Ehrenreich. It's like if they want to do Han post Return of the Jedi, but before The Force Awakens, a younger Han, but not
Yeah.
old Han. Do they go with Alden? Do they find another person? What do they do? And I think that's kind of a just a Lucasfilm problem in general that's led to indecision on the recasting of Leia or Luke or Han. And so I think just
Yeah.
this close, it
Yeah.
would have been a little bit weird to cast somebody random and then just never use them again. So they kind of would need to perfect that, because then you'd have two recasts of Leia, and then obviously a third if you count the little girl Leia. Um, so yeah, I think that's a tough one. I never really expected Leia outside of a mention, maybe, or just kind of a her in the distance, like if you just had a Senate shot or something and she was there. But yeah, so I'm not surprised about Leia, but it was a little surprised we didn't at least get like a hologram of Palpatine. But I think it makes a lot of sense for the show that we didn't.
Yeah. Yeah, like Liam said, I do like that we didn't get Palpatine. It works because we don't really have the same. Like the Emperor gets like what name drop like once in A New Hope or something. It's not really like his presence is. They're like we don't even want to bother this guy. That's why Vader's out here. Like that's like everybody's like terrified, right? And yeah, I think Liam, you were saying when Partagas kills himself, it's because of Krennic. I almost got the feeling that it was Palpatine. Like he's gonna go up to like Palpatine and his little council of cronies, right? And just how like, especially we being an ISB guy about the narrative, about all this collection, to have this slip away, such concrete stuff again and again and again, right? Be thrown into a room with a bunch of dudes that are like about the occult and the Force and everything like that would have been almost even more terrifying. But maybe it wasn't Palpatine. I just thought there was like an implication that you're at least getting super close to him, being like, "Hey, buddy, it's been a long day. The sun's going down real low, right?" Like I was like, do we need Palpatine for that? No. Can we imply that? Sure. Can we even leave it a little gray about who it is? Just the chain of command once you go up past the leader of ISB, how bad it can be. Like, yeah, I think It works. It works well, and it avoids kind of like that prequel George Lucasism. Like, as much as we love a lot about the original trilogy, a lot of the flaws that you can start to see with how he approaches storytelling kinda came about in Return of the Jedi, kind of like how he cut corners and all that, and this is a guy from the start in '77, like, when they're like, "Oh, like, you can't hear sound in space." He's like, "Well, in my movies, you can, right?" Like, he's always been very flexible about his own material. He's not anywhere near stringent as anybody else. But when you do this massive saga with families and over decades and all that, like, people are not ready to just be like, "Oh, it's just Sunday morning cartoons. People don't remember stuff next episode, next episode." Like, no, that's just not how it works, and maybe that's a disconnect between him and the fandom, but especially when he goes back to the prequels and then kinda throws in a Jabba the Hutt or just the special edition, putting in that version of the Jabba Hutt scene, right? Where you still have Han call him a wonderful human, like, how do you justify that? Walking over the tail, throwing in Boba, it's like, what's the whole big deal, right? Like, why can't we just let Jabba's presence, his name, carry up to episode 6, right? When you get to finally see him. Well, episode 1, you don't have a chance if you watch that as your first Star Wars movie because it's the first, right? So, I do like that when it's not necessary and you wanna have the original impact of, like, a character's appearance kinda take place, you know, great, awesome, and, it's a bit qualified too because obviously Palpatine is played by, like, a different actor, I think who recently passed away, Clive or someone, and then putting,
Clive
like,
Revel.
monkey yeah, Clive Revel, right, and putting, like, orangutan eyes and stuff, like, it's not really the same, they do replace it, so it's also another, like, "Well, fine, that was probably better too, George, good for you," right? He had his cake and ate it too, right? Like, it was great. He can do whatever he wants, but as the average fan, you lose some of the impact, right? While he's moving forward, when you're watching, you're like, so I'm liking Disney for the most part. Recently has been very careful about stuff like that. What you're gonna be running up against, what's already been pre-established. Again, never gonna love Jimmy Smits not being in this show, but I think Gilroy, how he's even handled, like, the K2SO stuff, right? If you actually look at that first page of the comic, it's the official Rebel report. In the show, they're like, "This is gonna be wiped from your record. You were not on Gorman," right? Like, on your log flights. There's even, like, an almost a built-in canon way that they worked around it without having to, like, try to adapt it, right? But yeah, like, this stuff, it's not necessary, it's hard to work around, and I'm sure the budget that they were like, General Merrick and Dodonna, I wish they were in the show, they probably were cut out because of how minor they are and how much money they would demand as legacies, right? Like, it's just the nature of the business there, so I'm glad that Gilroy has avoided that George Lucasism and done what he did with the budget that was definitely pushing itself very hard this final arc. The Leia thing though, like, I get it a little bit. I think by the end of the show, Clea was almost like more of like a darker, grayer Leia for me, like doing what's necessary for the cause, the hope that's almost driving Luthen in some ways. Like, this is you're still better to me. I want to protect you. Like, even if we're partners in this, like, come on. Like, sometimes you're my daughter. I'll do this for you, right? Like, I did like that. I know it wasn't ever in our chats, but there's a lot of people online who are like, is Clea Leia? Like, she just changed her name a little bit, and it had become a bit of, like, a fake rumor thing that everybody started, and I can get it because the hairstyles, how she carries herself, she's very regal, right? She does have that power to her and grace to her, but, I mean, any woman can have that, right? You don't have to just make her Princess Leia, and I don't think the age really, really works at all, so, um
No.
glad that you could find some parallels. That just shows that, like, there are Cassian said to Bill, "You would be surprised what you'd probably be able to laugh about with Luthen." In the same way, yeah, Cleo's like, "Oh, Yavin, you gonna send me out there to, like, be a hostage, to be, like, jail? Like, I hate this, right? But what's your final shot?" Her smiling, right? Like, it works. It really works. I like that they keep things disconnected. We're not running into the same late 2010s issue of, like, recasts, deepfakes, CGI, right? Like, right now, this is a show that's like, "This is unfortunate." We explain why it's unfortunate with Baylor. Everything else, let's keep it as is if it's not good.
Yeah, I mean, so go back to the thing with Partagas. It could be Palpatine. I just think it's kind of all higher up Imperials. He's
Yeah.
about to get
Yeah.
interrogated and drilled by all these Imperials, and Krennic is the one that knows what he failed at. So I think he'd be part of that
Yeah.
meeting. But yeah, I think it's the implication that there are people higher up than him that he is terrified of.
Yeah.
And I think that's what rubs off well on Krennic as well. Jose Montes says, I'm not done watching, but I'll watch this later. Nice haircut, Sanak. Um, and then congrats on 30K subs. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Hope you enjoy the show when you watch it. Matthew says, why did they not renew the show for season 3? It was actually not that they didn't renew it. It was just written as a 2-season show. It was announced as a 2-season show when they announced the show officially. I'm not sure if I don't think they announced how many seasons it was going to be when they kind of like forced announced it in 2019. Again,
Mhm.
I've said this a few times on the stream. I was at the 23 in 2019 when their big reveal was the official announcement of Obi-Wan Kenobi as a show. Most of it was their first ever Disney Plus panel because Disney
Yeah.
Plus launched at the end of 2019, and it feels like it's been around forever, but it launched at the end of 2019. It's focused on the Mandalorian mostly for the Star Wars section, but they did have just like a 5-minute thing where Diego Luna and Alan Tudyk came out on stage and were just
Yeah.
like goofing off, kind of being like, "Yeah, we're back for a Cassian show, and it's gonna be about Cassian, and K2's there too, and it's gonna be a lot of fun." And they just kind of like they had no, you could tell they had no idea what the show was about, other than it was
Yeah.
called Andor, and that was it. And then they did the official announcement for like the structure of the show and Tony Gilroy and the talent and all that in 2020 on that video investors thing that they made where they announced all the like Star Wars shows that we're seeing now. So, and then that point, they announced it as a 2-season show and they announced the structure and the way it was going to work. So it's not that they didn't renew it, it's that they always had the plan to do this. So that is why there's no season 3. Brogu says, hi guys, new to your channel. Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you, Brogu. Hope you show back up on our streams and enjoy talking Star Wars with us and have enjoyed all the content recently. Mrs. Mandarin says Clea's backstory was good. Yeah, I loved Clea's backstory. I thought it was great. Really entertaining stuff. And I thought it was good look at Luthen and his progression, not just through the eyes of Clea, which again, like I said earlier, I think it makes his death a little bit more tragic because you see it through her eyes and we learn so much about her this season, grow with her so much this season, and then have her flashback and her story. But it just makes like it shows the like both caring and brutal sides of Luthen and how he starts as this guy who's shaken up in a war zone. He's sitting in a ship just saying, make it stop. And he can't escape it. And that's kind of like he finds her, and that's kind of the moment he now has a reason to fight beyond himself. It's like he's trying to create this world for her, and she's so driven with him. And so I thought it all worked really well as this, again, he's the shadowy figure. They left him as a shadowy figure, don't really get to know him, but you get to know the version of him that Clea saw. And I thought that worked really, really well. So I loved getting the backstory, but I think it worked even better for the story to get it all through her eyes rather than through his.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I think, I mean, I think I by the end, Cleo is definitely one of my favorite characters of the season because one, her actress just dominates the screen, even with the smaller amount of time that she had in season one. Just kind of like the looks, like just total energy, just completely like really enjoyed everything that she had, and then she got to really talk and perform, and then pull back on Luthen and push on him a little bit, and like you know that one scene that they like the final goodbye basically, where he's like, man, like they're putting their guns together. They're like, this is just it. Like we have to get going. And he's like, man, we used to wish we could have like a perfect time. He's like, right, like them, their partnership, the journey, right? Like, and you could just see how much it meant to like. That's maybe like the most real Luthen has been throughout this whole show, and you could see that in that with that relationship with Clea, and even if it's not just the value that he gives to that, like validate her feelings and, like, all the layers that have made her into who she is, like, yeah, fantastic. I loved what they did. Again, I really think Tony Gilroy, like we were talking about, like, before, like, why no season 3 and all this and that. It's like, well, one thing he said was like, "Well, Diego's gonna be a little too old by then to be, like, in his late 20s, early 30s." But 2, it's like, well, they had this plan, right? Like, did they write these arcs exactly as they were? I don't think so. I think they had a general idea what big things they wanted to hit. When season 1 was happening, they probably were already well underway, responded to that, had time to build sets and all that. But yeah, no, I just it's a shame because as great as the Clea stuff was, they knew exactly what they're doing, they knew how to execute it. It all works so well. I'm like, "Man, how would she have been if she just had this as her season to, like, take up space instead of force the situation, push back on Luthen and make him realize was just how much he's kinda strayed away from the standard that they used to have and all that." That's stuff that would have happened in a way better show. It makes a lot of sense now why they changed even the title of the show from Andor to Andor: A Star Wars Story, right? This is the first thing to use a Star Wars story since Solo: A Star Wars Story, right? And it's not something that I expect every single TV show from now on to be having. I think it's because quite literally, it's just how strange the format is, how well it's done, but how just it's gonna feel awkward no matter what, however you watch it. There's no clean way of watching season 1 and season 2 back to back other than just accepting you're gonna be binging or taking 1 episode at a time, right? It's just not gonna feel 100% right, but it's a beautiful piece of art that allows Clea, allows these characters to still work almost as perfectly as they can with this weird structure.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And I think by doing it this way, by tying it specifically to Rogue One with that title as well, I mean
Yeah,
it allowed them to do something that made it wholly unique from what they originally kind of pitched, which was Cassian Andor spy funds,
yeah,
adventure story. It just turned into something completely different. Like it's so to me, one of the things that's so weird to think about is just that moment. Because I remember sitting there. It's one of the reasons why when this is an episode that's long gone kind of off of YouTube and podcasts. But when we were like we did an episode when we were podcast only. We're talking about that investors day and we're like, what's the things we're most looking forward to from that announcement? Andor was in my like top 3, I think, because
yeah,
I was pitched it in 19, so I was already kind of had, that idea of what it was going to be in my head. I didn't think it was going to be exactly like this. I thought it could be really cool. And then it kind of turned into something completely different. So it's fun to think back to 2019, 2020 when you saw the original idea for like or at least the original pitch to the public for this and then eventually what we got it was definitely pitched as a much more action packed spy thriller type show than what it became and if they needed to pitch it that way to get what we got I'm very happy they did. Brogu says I really enjoyed Andor. Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it. Thank you for letting us know. Clarissa Navarrete says, "Hi, I'm new here. I'm gonna start watching it now." Well, hopefully you enjoy the episodes and that we didn't spoil anything for you, and hopefully you check this stream out when you're done watching. Dan Murphy says, "Spectacular show through and through. Bummed that it's over and not much to look forward to with Star Wars for quite some time." Yeah, that it is kind of unfortunate. I mean, we are entering definitely the longest stretch. It depends. We have so many things coming out in 2026. It kind of depends when things start because we really could get something starting in like January. And I could even see something like the mall show or something if it's further along, maybe get pushed to starting at the end of the year this year, like a December 2025 or something like that because there are so many things they announced. They announced the Mall show, Ninth Jedi show, Mandalorian and Grogu, Ahsoka season 2. All of that is coming out next year, and it just seems like there's too much stuff to come out in 1 year for Star Wars, especially with how big of a year it's going to be for the MCU as well. So there's just so much content coming. I wouldn't be shocked if some of the animated stuff might get pushed to the very end of this year. I don't want to give people false hope, but it would be maybe November, December to where the point where it's basically 2026. But we still do have Visions coming out and a Lego Star Wars thing. But outside of that, you're right, Dan. Not much to look forward to from Star Wars unless you're a book reader. Where I'm actually pretty excited for the second half of the year. and Star Wars books because there's so much stuff coming out and so many different parts of Star Wars. Like we have the end of the High Republic finally, which is really exciting. And then after that, we're getting a Bad Batch book, which I'm not that excited for, but it could change my mind because I don't know. I'm open to just exploring all these different characters in novel form. I'm very excited for the Master of Evil book. So we have so many different things. And then we're getting our first novel
Yeah.
follow up to, the sequel trilogy. First time we're going beyond the sequel trilogy in a while. So that's exciting too. So I mean, we got a lot of things to look forward to in the Star Wars front. It's just unfortunate that it's not Star Wars content like film and TV that most people are looking forward to. But again, the positive is that hopefully they've taken their time to make 2026 the rebirth of Star Wars, kind of like how Mandalorian was the rebirth of Star Wars in 2019 and 2020. The 2019 to 2020 stretch on Disney Plus is an underrated era of Star Wars. I think
Oh
will
yeah.
be something
Oh
that
yeah.
we look back a little more fondly on in the future because you had Mandalorian season 1, Mandalorian season 2, and Clone Wars season 7, and it just felt like, man, Disney Plus is the place for Star Wars. Look at all this great stuff we're getting. And then we got the JPEG more faster, initiative, and that's when it all kind of started slowly dwindling in quality. Um, but yeah, that was kind of a rebirth for Star Wars after the sequel trilogy tailed off, just like 2015 and 16 were a rebirth was for Star Wars with Force Awakens and Rogue One. We keep getting these rebirths every few years, and I'm excited for what 2026 holds and the fact that they have held so much stuff back. Hopefully, it is an indication that they are spending the time needed to make this stuff the best it can possibly be. But we will still be here talking Star Wars all year round. So if you want to continue to join us, Dan, join us on these live streams because we'd really like to have you. And again, we are close to 30-ish minutes away from wrapping up our stream. So if you haven't sent in a chat, we have a lot of more people joining us now than who were here at the beginning. Send in a chat. You can send in the chat and we'll try to get to them as fast as we can. Want to guarantee you get one on tonight's stream, send in a super chat or look at our Patreon YouTube membership programs where if you join a certain tier, you can get priority chat access. Also, we have a lot more people watching right now than have liked the video. So if you could do us a favor, like the video, help us out a lot, and then subscribe because we will be here talking Star Wars for the rest of the year, even if there's no big shows that are coming out. But yeah, Sanak, what else coming out this year are you looking forward to? As yes, there are no shows really besides Visions. Again, we still do have Visions, but it's
I
mostly
mean,
going to be the book realm that keeps us satiated with Star Wars stuff.
and it kind of always is, right? Anytime there's stuff that seems like, oh, Star Wars is dead. It's like that's when like publishing fans are like, yeah, Star Wars is dead. Nobody can bother me anymore. I can get all these awesome books and all. And usually that's when some of the best stretches happen. Right. So yeah, I don't know. For me, I'm looking forward to Master of Evil for sure. The Bad Batch Sanctuary should be interesting. That post episode 9 novel with Jana and Finn, like good, especially with the subject matter that they're covering. I'm very glad that even if they don't make this like an essential story, they're at least thematically trying to build out stuff that episode 9 just failed to do with those characters and just didn't have time for. So I know everyone's like, "Oh, Finn should have been a Jedi." Yeah, I nobody, even people who love the film, wouldn't disagree with you with that. It's just now let's start building the bridge there, building a little bit of hype momentum with the fandom that usually is down for anything because it's books, right? Like, how often do you get a book that you know keeps discourse going for more than 2 hours inside your small niche space, right? Compared to an Andor or a Mandalorian. It's not the same, but that's the stuff that is like the soil of Star Wars. So I'm looking really forward to how they're now that we know Starfighter is gonna be. Fingers crossed if they are filming at the end of this year to start filming in the fall, that's gonna be our first post episode 9 film, and it'd be great to have stuff that it's referencing or kinda fits nicely with that is just a bunch of auxiliary material that at least gets us reacquainted with the world, evened out in ways that we just don't get because of how compressed the timeline is, like, yeah, I'm looking forward to that just because we just needed to start. I know we've been so behind on comics and everything, but, like, Legacy of Vader is going on right now too, and it's been getting good reviews, so yeah, stuff like that. It's just we're really hitting that point in time where yeah, it's just it's weird to feel like, "Oh, man, we're finally slowing down with Star Wars," but after, like, nearly 10 years, right? Like, that's crazy that this could be the first time that we actually feel the absence of it, and it's what's the thing that's gonna bring us back? The biggest property post sequels, if not in the Disney era, and is gonna be in movie theaters, right? Like, it's gonna explode, it's gonna be big and everything. Hope you guys stick around on the channel because we've got book reviews coming out, you know, for Into the Light, we're gonna have the Wayseeker review, we'll catch up on stuff. We're gonna have a lot of time to, like, you know, expand on original material and content, so and, you know, if there are ideas that you want us to try out or you want us to workshop with you guys in live, just let us know, you know, we'll have a lot of just our exploration of Star Wars happening here for the next few months and just a couple of notable things in publishing to carry us, but yeah, and I'm excited, and I can't say I'm excited for Visions, it's really just the books at this point for me, and the comics, I'll say post episode 6 comics are about to start, so I'm excited for that.
Yeah, it is kind of a just like we're getting a refresh next year on the film and TV side. We're starting to get a little bit of a refresh with the High Republic ending as well
Yeah,
on the publishing side as well. So it's kind of it's exciting rebirth for the franchise and just seeing that it can go in new directions. Hopefully they find some cool creative ways to take on a lot of these problems as well. Also very excited for Zero Company. I think that could be a pretty cool game.
yeah,
So
yeah,
still have that to look forward to. But yeah, it's a little bit of a slower year for Star Wars. But it feels like, just because we don't have dates yet, we have years, we don't have dates yet for all this stuff coming out. It feels like we're in this like amorphous era of Star Wars. Like, oh my God, this is the first time we don't know when things are coming
yeah,
for Star Wars since 2014. But in a way, you know, if you count animation as a big release, then we haven't had this since, the period between Clone Wars season 6 in 2014 and Rebels starting. I mean, even then was, I guess, a smaller gap too. Rebels started in
yeah,
2014. Um, I guess maybe the next longest stretch was Revenge of the Sith to Clone Wars movie, like 3 years. That was the last stretch that's this long. But if they do announce something for January, then it's only a 7-month wait, which is something we've have dealt with in current Disney between, Force Awakens and Rogue One or Rogue One: The Last Jedi. Yes, we did have Rebels in the meantime, but yeah, so these are waits like it just feels like there's nothing coming because they haven't given us concrete release dates, but there's still so much coming so soon that it's not that big of a time off. If we had to wait till next May for Mandalorian and Grogu and nothing comes out until after that, then
yeah,
yeah, that'll be like a real long stretch for Star Wars in the last 20 years. But if something comes out in January or February, it's really not as long as it feels. So we'll be anxiously waiting and covering the news when they finally break when these things are coming out. Kylie Stewart says, "This is Kylie Stewart's son, Ben." Well, hello there, Ben. I find it really interesting that we went from clone troopers to dark clone troopers to stormtroopers to First Order stormtroopers. Will we have Jedi troopers? Um, Good question, Ben. I don't think so. Just because I think kind of Jedi troopers would basically be Inquisitors type of thing. Like if we're gonna have some type of Imperial who's formerly a Jedi, it would be an Inquisitor. And then as for like, would they make clones have force powers? We already kind of crossed that bridge with Omega. We all thought maybe they were going to try to do some midichlorian stuff with Omega. It didn't seem like it ever panned out that way. We never really got full confirmation on that or not, but basically they just revealed that she was the pure blood clone, so they needed her as for continuing to make that genetic template. Um, will we ever get something like that? Can't say it's impossible. It's definitely something that would have been more likely in like a Star Wars Legends than it would be now. I think back to those like super fast guys from the Revenge of the Sith game that had the reflexes of Jedi, the clones that you
Yeah, yeah.
fight.
Oh god, I hate it.
Um, but, yeah, I don't think we'll ever get, like, an official Jedi trooper.
Yeah, that's a tough one. Because I agree no to Jedi troopers as, like, this is just something that they create, but there's this is a whole entire tangent for me, honestly, but to kinda simplify it, I still don't think The Force Awakens as a title has been really fulfilled yet, right? Episode 9 could have really done a little bit more with, like, okay, Finn, you could argue it's just because of what he saw, the bloodshed and everything on Jakku, and that, like, snapped him out of it, but the Force also awakened in him, we know that he has the Force, okay? But then Janna also kinda snapped out of it with her whole crew, right? Like, so I do wonder if when they say, like, these First Order stormtroopers are kinda waking up to it. I wonder if it's just, like, just the Force is just waking up a bunch, or if it's, like, maybe specific ones that are waking up from to this reality of what they're actually, like, fighting against or fighting for. Maybe they have the Force, and I could see, like, especially with that book, maybe exploring the idea that some of these guys just able to see something, feel something, maybe they're more intuitively linked with each other more than just, like, a regular, you know group of soldiers would be. Maybe they have little tiny force abilities, more like enhancements as opposed to like full on telekinesis and all that. And maybe just one or two like moments of desperation things can come out. Yeah, I could see that. I could see that. And especially if like, there's been ideas thrown out for a while, but if they do eventually get to the whole version of like Finn like doing whole like stormtrooper rebellions, the people that he'd kinda keep around him, his little company, would probably be these people that are his closest advisors, the people who work best with his skill sets as he's gonna grow more into the Force and everything. Wouldn't you also, if you have, like, a group of people that have awakened, also kind of do that? Right? Like, that'd be really interesting for me to see him almost become, like, a very militaristic Jedi just because of his conditioning and then the Force awakening at the same time for all these guys that what it's the thing that bonds them so easily, our backgrounds, our functionality, right? I'd love to see that. I think that's almost like a much more natural way of getting into, like, an Imperial Knights kind of route, like, where it's like, "Oh, okay, like, these are people who don't necessarily wanna just be pure, but, like, they still are trying to do the right thing at the end of the day, more enforcement, whatever." I could see something like this be stemmed out and maybe fulfilling a little bit more of the Force Awakening instead of it just being like, "Oh, we've got a little bit of Finn, but it's really Kylo and Rey." Like, I think this would be a great way of, like, really fulfilling that title. You can't just throw that title out and feel like it's been well earned, I think, at this point. Because I think Phantom Menace, when that came out, that's a title people are like, "Ah, o okay," but then by the end, you're like, "Ah, it was City so long. Look how it unfolded." I don't really see what happens after The Force Awakens, right? Like, I see a couple of people, it's so hyper focused, and even the side characters, the supporting characters drop off in their story, unlike in the prequels and the original trilogy. So, is this a chance that could be explored that way with this concept, with Finn helping us bridge toward maybe a possible John Boyega or animated show sort of appearance in the future that can be a little bit more concrete and definitive about that? Yeah, yeah, and I think that'd be a great thing to see in that book that's coming with Finn and Janna and Ben, but I don't think that's gonna happen. So, that's just me, the optimist, the dreamer, with my whole tangent, but I don't think that's happening.
Well, and that's an interesting idea too, just because, you know, one of the problems we've had in the original trilogy and post-original trilogy part of the timeline is that the way George Lucas treats Force users in the original trilogies, it's a special, like, gift. There's very few people that have it, it's
Yeah,
very rare. But obviously the prequels, there's thousands and thousands of Jedi. And
yeah,
so you almost have to have unimportant Force users to juxtapose with important Force users
yeah,
in the post original trilogy part of the timeline, right? Like like we need Luke to have like a full Jedi academy in the New Republic era because there are going to be people in that academy who just are nobodies who are just there learning about the Force and becoming Jedi. And then you also have the Jason Solos and the Jada Solos and the Kyle Katarns and stuff like that, right? Like it's kind of we need the same thing in canon because if Luke only has 6 apprentices, then like what happened to all these people who can use the Force? Because yes, they suppressed their abilities or they hid their abilities when the Empire was in charge, but the New Republic is in charge in canon for 30 years. And so where did all these people go and what happened to them? And then when the First Order comes back, the First Order really only challenges the New Republic the way the sequels shook out for 1 year. And then we don't know what the fallout is, and we're going to start to learn about that in the Last Order book. But how long does that go? Is it go for another 2, 3, 4, 5 years like it did in Legends with the New Republic versus the Empire? Does it go for only a year because the First Order was never really like a truly formed government? They were just taking over. They were the rebellion, kind of, versus the establishment was the resistance, New Republic. Like, where does that go, and how does that affect Force users? Because it's kind of like a weird thing, and they don't seemingly go after Force users the way the Empire did. So where did all these people go, and like why are there not Force users out there? And so I think it speaks to just kind of a larger question around the post A New Hope or post Return of the Jedi, really part of Star Wars canon, where it's like, yeah, it can be a little bit redundant and eye rolly in Legends when every time you read a book about somebody they become a Force user, and that's for sure. It's goofy, but it still kind of makes sense with George Lucas's lore because in the
Yeah.
prequels there's thousands of Jedi and there's a new Force user like every day. The Jedi are constantly bringing Force users to the temple on Coruscant. So like, how do we get back to that point, and how do we get to the point where you can have extra Jedi? People walking in the background who nobody cares about and doesn't do anything, but they exist, and then we can give them a name later and make an action figure of them, and they're just this guy in the background. Like, we need to get to that point again with Force users, and so going to that point with Finn and with all these other characters, I think it speaks to something larger that we've just never really tackled in canon. And when we get there, it should open some new doors for all the facets of the Jedi post Return of the Jedi. So I think that's pretty interesting. And then like Jedi, like the idea of a Jedi trooper, like the way you're phrasing it, Ben, kind of seems like, are we talking about post First Order? And like Sanak said, like if you're comparing it to the Legacy comics, like that is an interesting way to connect it to the Imperial Knights. But I think a Jedi Trooper would honestly make a little more sense to be something that was around closer to the Old Republic. Because we
Yeah.
know, like, one of the old Legends concepts was like they took in all these Force users, but there's some that weren't that attuned with the Force and couldn't really survive combat, and they were sent to the Agricultural Corps. And that was something that was around in the prequel era, and it was something around in the Old Republic and all this stuff. What if there was a group of Jedi who were attuned to the Force, but they weren't like lightsaber combat ready? They were gave them a blaster, said you were Jedi troopers, and they fought in like the Mandalorian Wars or the New Sith Wars and stuff like that. Like you put them into battles in the Old Republic era, and whatever versions of the Old Republic era you create now, there were these Jedi troopers who were trained as Jedi, but didn't really work out. Weren't really strong enough. That could be an alternative for doing something like a Jedi trooper. It'd be interesting. Mrs. Mandarin says all scenes with Mon Mothma, conversations throughout the season, and of course, the escape after the speech was very good. So sad for the ISB guy. Luthen used him up and disposed of him. All right, I'm really leaving this time. Good night. Good night. But yeah, I mean, that's this symbolizes the entire journey of Luthen. Is this guy's like, I need to know where can go. I have a wife and daughter that are in hiding, waiting for me, and I'm turning to you, who I trust, with this information. Can you get me somewhere safe? Luthen takes the information and just shoots him. And it's just, I mean, Luthen's not a nice guy. He's not a likable guy. And that's why, again, like the more and more we're talking about it, the more it's growing on me, the fact that we see Luthen through Clea's eyes, because at least you could see him through the eyes of somebody who truly loved him, uh, because you see all his faults too. And we just saw that moment at the beginning of the episode where he kills somebody whose family is in danger, who's just trying to get out, who served him for all these years. He just shoots him. Very much so. I mean, he's obviously paralleling what Cassian's going to do to Tivik at the beginning of Rogue One. So there's a lot of great parallels there. But yeah, it was sad for somebody who doesn't get that much screen time. Lonnie has a lot of close calls in the show, and then to go out like that with somebody he trusts. And it's the opposite. Also, another great comparison too, comparing it to Mon Mothma last arc, where she doesn't want to go with Luthen's guy because she doesn't really trust Luthen. She knows all he cares about is keeping the information safe. She trusts Bale more than she trusts Luthen, but ultimately it's Luthen's connection that gets her out. Like it goes the opposite way than it does for Lonnie. And part of me wants to think that even though Lonnie's done so much for the rebellion and done so much for Luthen, part of me wants to think that one of the reasons he shoots him too is just a little bit because he still works for the Empire type of thing. Even if he is a good guy, a spy, it's like you're still an Imperial, so I don't feel as bad shooting you as I would feel shooting Mon Mothma. So yeah, but it's a tough scene for sure, and it's really sad. I mean, I was surprised. I was surprised it's not out of character for Luthen, but I was surprised when that moment came up because I really didn't think he was gonna off him until you see that.
Yeah, yeah. You know, I was surprised by the death, but I was also like very pleased by the end. I was like, oh yes, this is something that allows us to truly be like, he's not a hero. Look what he did, right? Like he's talking about all this big game and telling Lonnie, "You be one of the heroes, be one of my heroes," and he killed one of his heroes, right? Like that says so much about Luthen that he'll use the tiles, the namesakes, that make these different equations that make sense for people, that motivate people, that disarm people, and he's like, "Yeah, and I'm gonna just use it in the most brutal of ways," right? Like whatever's most efficient for me, whatever is necessary for the moment. Lonnie was for him, with the level that he dropped of like, "Hey, by the way, here's a whole freaking Death Star thing." And again, I wish we could have seen, like, Saw Gerrera kinda be a little bit more clued into that, more than just, like, the implications of Tivik and all that. I wanted to see a little bit more direct stuff, maybe referencing something from Rebels or, like, an episode that just ended there. But regardless, right, once Lonnie drops that, like, that's above his pay grade. Like, now he's demanding things that Luthen himself cannot protect for, for his own sake and for his own needs. So I like that he was like the safest thing. Oh, you want me to keep you safe? Bam. Now you're safe. Now nobody can ever hurt you again. Your wife and children will not be investigated in the same way or tortured in any of the same way. Like he's not wrong. It's not a good thing to do, right? And that's what makes it such a fascinating character study that Dylan has really just pulled out here, and is had a magic tricks because season 1, I could absolutely see this Luthen end where he does, but to make these jumps and make it feel seamless is like, wow, okay. Yeah, he really had control of that character, the composure, everything. Walked that tightrope. He really did. And the writing was spot on, dialogue was spot on. Like every time I had doubts about Luthen this season, and I still had doubts until like, that episode 10 finished. I was like, "Yeah, man," like, they always came back swinging with something that made me go like, dang, man, what's such a fascinating character." So, yeah, sucks for Lonnie, but it only made Luthen better for me, so I think that's a win-win.
Toy Darian Dan sent in a super chat. Thank you so much. Toy Darian Dan says 30,000 subs. Keep it up, lads. Thank you so much. We really appreciate the support from all of you who have joined us throughout Andor, throughout all our other streams, throughout our channel's life. We appreciate your support and for coming back and continuing to watch our content. It means a lot to us. We put a lot of time and a lot of effort into creating stuff for you guys, and it's a lot of work and it's a labor of love. So we really appreciate your guys' support. So thank you so much for the super chat, and thank you to all of you for joining us tonight. Again, continue to send in your chats if you have anything else you'd like to say. We don't have too much time left in our stream tonight, but if you have any last thoughts, comments, questions, anything you'd like to discuss about Andor or Star Wars or whatever, send into the chat. We will try to get to as many as possible before we wrap up for the night. But thank you so much for joining us again for the entire ride of Andor Season 2. Spooky Jawa says, beautifully well done. Yeah, couldn't agree more. Kylie Stewart says, is it just me or did it look like one of Clea's flashbacks was on the wall of China in China? Yeah, I think it was supposed to kind of symbolize that. There's a couple shots throughout their flashbacks that kind of look like different Star Wars versions of famous locales. Like even the bridge scene definitely reminded me of the bridge
Mm.
in Prague. You can see it in Spider-Man: Far From Home if you want to check that out. But I've been to that bridge and it looked very similarly structured. So I feel like they were definitely using a lot of real world inspirations for a lot of the sequences in those flashbacks.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it speaks to like being almost feeling like you're recognizing some of these scenes and sites, even though it is firmly in a Star Wars world. That's kind of the whole point of the character. It's just like how someone, if they didn't have the galaxy explore, would explore as we do currently, all of Earth, right? Try to and people who get to do that are so cultured and so enriched and almost driven by that, right? And for that to be almost the source of his rebellion, like, stop killing everything, like, let things live and breathe and extend, right? Seeing all these sites that have such prominence in our culture and, like, what it conveys to us, and then blended it with the Star Wars imagery. Yeah, I think that was very intentional. He is an artist. You at the end of the day, he's a misunderstood artist. That's really the best way of looking at Luthen for me.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Darth Revan says these 3 episodes felt like an epilogue, not in a bad way. I kind of know what you mean,
Mhm.
Revan. It's definitely not the same stakes, galactic stakes, as it
Yeah.
was last week. Like, and just in a filmmaking way too. Like, I guess we have the way Andor season 1 is structured, and this is to the point of other people like Mrs. Mandarin who said that they liked season 1 better. Season 1's finales of each episode always led to like this big climactic event, and they just kept getting bigger and bigger. Like the Narkina 5 stuff was a little bit bigger than the Aldani heist, which was then trumped by the Ferrex revolt, and it just kept getting a little bigger and bigger and bigger. And this show started out with like smaller, like a character, big, exciting finale to the first arc, and then the second arc has a little bit more action, but also is more character driven type of exciting finale. Then the third arc is like the entire time action, excitement, political excitement, and also violent action and excitement. And then this was definitely the falling action type of thing, the aftermath, and like you said, kind of an epilogue. But I would say more of falling action slash aftermath of last week. It's a lot of it's built on the backs of what happened in Gorman, people's people's raised interest in why the Empire did that. If you're on the rebellion side, why the Empire did that. If you're on the Imperial side, why did or what ramifications does this revolt have with the rest of the rebel cells and ultimately Mon Mothma's speech? So, like, I think everything centers around Gorman, and because everything centers around Gorman, these episodes feel like falling action, but I think in the same way as the first 2 arcs of season 2, they carry a lot of climax for our characters and less so for like galactic events like the third
Yeah,
arc.
yeah. Yeah, that's the best way of putting it. This is the end of the Andor story, not the bridge to Rogue One, right? That was the big fear. And yes, you do feel it because the scale of everything just gets so much bigger visually in this arc, even if you're like, oh, it's not really bigger for the galaxy, is it? Right? Yeah, it absolutely makes sense. And then if this was a show that was trying to just be the Rogue One prequel, it would have ended with Cassian about to be Tevik. Instead, it ended with Bix, with Cassian's son or daughter. I'm not really sure, right? Like, that's that's Gilroy being like, "Yeah, this is the way I would have done this original material back in 2016 if I had full control. Here it is now because I have an opportunity to bridge it, right? But I'm also gonna make sure if you never really wanna watch Rogue One, if you're just a person who just loves Andor, you can watch Andor all the way through, and you'll get everything you need."
Human Help says Andor is the best Star Wars series by far, a triumph for Lucasfilm and a true masterwork. Andor cements itself as the gold standard of what modern Star Wars can be. Andor was a captivating ride from start to finish. The narratives make you feel a real sense of urgency that feels palpable to our current day politics. Every character is complex, the scenes are astonishing, and the storytelling gets to the heart of the rebellion. one of my favorite aspects of how Andor ends is how the villains do suffer, but not at the hands of the protagonist because fascism eats its own, even while it has the upper hand. Hey, yeah, all great points. It is the gold standard what Star Wars can be, but Sanak and I were actually talking about this before the show too. I think it's poignant to bring up as well on our stream because Andor is just so different, right? Like even if you look at Rogue One, there's a little bit more of the classic Star Wars mysticism in Rogue One. There's the Guardians of the Wills and the Force flowing through Chirrut, and Baze constantly wanting to ignore the Force, the will of the Force, but Chirrut says, "I'm one with the Force is with me." That the Force being a big part of the belief and why these people do what they do, and just the nature of the rebellion being rooted in that type of mysticism around Star Wars. That's still there in Rogue One, and that's there in almost every Star Wars project, but it's not here in Andor really at all. We have of course, our Force healer. We have uh, Bail Organa saying, "May the Force be with you." There are some signs of it, but it's a show that definitely takes a more grounded, realistic stance on everything Star Wars. But one of the things, the fears of, I'm not saying you're saying this, human help, but one of the fears for me, if Lucasfilm were to take the wrong lessons from this, is kind of the lessons that like a DC took from the Dark Knight when it was popular. You can't just make everything Andor. You have to have the right creative team around it. You have to have the right group of people to make it a special project. One of the reasons this stands out in style and tone and function from all Star Wars shows and why it feels so much more elevated is because we don't have other Star Wars shows like this. And that's not because they haven't wanted to or haven't tried. It's because one, they don't have the right creative teams around them, and two, Star Wars is inherently a myth. It's classical fairy tale type storytelling. And that's what's built on the back of what George Lucas does. And so this type of thing, while a great spin and while it's a fantastic show, you can't make Star Wars into this style. You can't just say, well, Andor was what everybody loves. It's critically acclaimed. That's what it should be. That's not, it's almost, it works because it's antithetical to everything that Star Wars is inherently. And so by doing that, it's this like kind of what if take on the style of Star Wars almost, and because of that, it works. But if you got 15 wannabe Andors, then Andor gets watered down, the style gets watered down, people start clamoring for that myth again with Star Wars. And I think that's one of the reasons we probably won't get another Andor. Definitely not anytime soon. Won't say that one day, 15 years from now, they don't say, "Hey, we have this great idea to do an Andor style show, but leading up to The Force Awakens, or an Andor style show at the beginning of the Dark Times." Stuff like that. They could do that again one day, but I think one of the interesting looks at the fandom with Andor is some people are just so obsessed with Andor as their end all be all for Star Wars. Like this is what Star Wars should be. And even though I loved Andor, excuse me, even though I loved Andor, it shouldn't be like this. Star Wars shouldn't be like Andor all the time because then Andor doesn't become special anymore. And so we need both sides of Star Wars, obviously. I think there's still room for mature storytelling beyond Andor with the right creative teams, but it's not the thing that the lesson Lucasfilm learns from this is not we need to make everything like Andor. It's that there's room for compelling adult storytelling in Star Wars, and it can be in a different style or different tone than Andor, but there's room for that more PG-13, borderline R style storytelling in Star Wars. But the core of Star Wars will still and always should remain that legend, that myth that George Lucas was trying to create.
Yeah, it is a really, really, really hard thing to, like, settle on, right, for what is Star Wars. It's been a lifelong debate since 1978. There's somebody out there in the world probably thinks that, the holiday special is more Star Wars for me than even the original Star Wars in some bizarro way, but, like, that is a thing in the fandom. There are things and angles and stories that have been told, like, been experienced that it might have come down to just what was accessible to you, might have come down to just what era you grew up in. but it shapes absolutely everything you look about Star Wars. I'm sure in 30 years, I'm gonna be arguing with some dude being like, "You don't know Star Wars. I was around there with the George Lucas era and the Disney's first run of era." Like, I'm sure I will be like that. I hope not to be, honestly, because that is tantamount to the problem we're running into here with even, like, the Andor enthusiasts, like Liam said. You can love it. There's so many people who've just watched Andor, having seen Rogue One, 'cause, everyone was hyped after The Force Awakens, nothing else. S They get to now combine it and see, this show with all its backlog of details, right, that's been implied or now it's fully explored. Awesome, great. But you don't regularly watch every Star Wars show. You're probably not the type of person who watches Mandalorian, Kenobi, tolerates stuff that's very up and down like we do on this channel, right? We don't love that stuff, but it is still Star Wars to us, right? That a lot of people just don't watch that. So you see that and you're like, I love it. Awesome. I love it too. I don't think 5-year-old me loves this show. No, you're not ready for anything like this. There's just so much you're missing. Like right now, funnily enough, I'm watching another very fascist coded show, right? With how Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood plays out, right? The whole concept is like working within this huge government conspiracy of people like seeking a greater power to control more people and the others are fighting within it, right? It's a very similar thing, but it's targeted a little bit more for a younger audience. I'm watching it now. 10 years ago, I didn't pick up anything about, like, the political stuff, like, just the weight of the world, how it eats up people, like people are saying, out of fascism eats its own upper hand, right? Like, it's a real thing, and it's a thing that you see in the show. Dead an incredible example of that. Krennic builds off of that, just happened to be 10 years ago when we saw that now. Now we understand this guy was everything in this show. Bam. He's just a crony to Tarkin. He doesn't care about him. He thinks he's a joke, all this and that, right? But this is a show that because, we've grown older, we can be matured, we've seen a lot of the influences, we've seen what influenced George, we've seen other Star Wars creators take those influences, try their own things out. We've seen how story groups, all that work. This is just a 1 in a million shot of this happening with the format change between season 1 and 2. It's not comparable. It should be praised endlessly for what it achieved, but again, I'm not telling a 5-year-old to go watch Andor. This is very hard stuff to really sink your teeth into. It is long, it is deliberate. That's first season, I found myself having less patience for on a rewatch than I did when it first came out. I almost immediately adjusted season two's pacing because I was like, "I'm missing a little bit more of the casual flightiness that comes with the classic saga stuff," right? So all that really does matter, all that's gonna shape it. I've been harping on weeks too about, like, the translation of canon, how there may be a empirical version of what canon is, but different storytellers, mediums, everything changes how it is interpreted, how it is digested, right? So, this is another example. This is a story I think you could tell fairly well with Filoni in a Rebel style format with that age rating. It just won't hit the same on certain things, but is it forgetting stuff? No, right? That's a great way for kids to understand a little bit more about the Empire and its oppression, right? You see stuff like that explored with Tarkintown, how Thrawn is using Lothal. Like there's a lot of things that these shows, even TVY7, are touching that Andor does just a little bit more explicitly. I don't want that to go away. I don't want my fantasy wizards and the whimsy of that to go away, right? If we suddenly make them so grounded, then we start forgetting that it was the pulp of it. It was the fantasy, the myth, the joy, the hope of it. There's nothing hopeful about Andor. It's a bittersweet hope at best, right? So yeah, when people say, like, "I want this forever for Star Wars," just not getting how incredible that this actually turned out right after a first season that was well acclaimed to this be arguably as good, if not better, with all that format changes, with everything going on structurally with Disney, with all its franchises, like, this is yeah, there's no way of replicating it, and I'm sure people will try, but you'll probably have more of, like, a situation where these creative voices, they can stand out, they can stick out, they'll do a great job, they really wanna do that translation of canon and really tell the story in the best genre that they're suited to, the voice that they're suited for, and it might not work out. Leslie Headland had a great TV background, a strong move to go for a proper writer's room. It just didn't work out. right? It just maybe some things just didn't line up with the budget, with what she was pushing for in Star Wars. It just didn't line up, but we thought there were so many things right there. There's a lot of things that aren't right here with Andor season 2, and it worked out, right? Like, it's just fundamentally a lucky 1 in a million that happened. I want that seriousness, like Liam said, push a little stuff a little bit more R-rated, go a little deeper. It shouldn't just be books that have to deal with some of the mature stuff. It should be more, especially in a world that is more and more serious, a little bit more and more dark about what kids are experiencing, what they know through the internet and all that. I'm not gonna say they're gonna have the same innocent, bright-eyedness of someone from '77. No, that's just not a reality of it. But I still wouldn't show Andor to a 5-year-old, and that should not change. I'm still gonna put on a prequel film, an original trilogy, sequel film, because that's just the purity of Star Wars. That still is, even if you don't love all those films, there is a purity to them that this does not have because it's choosing not to. It's choosing to show you the grounded soil, the root, the hard stuff that comes with everything that leads into the original trilogy. Jumping in back 1,000 years for the old republic and trying to do it this way? No, won't work either. Because I don't want it to be so grounded that I'm not now missing out on legions of Sith and Darth Bane doing force thought bombs and all that, right? Like, no, I still want all that stuff, but maybe take lessons with how serious they approached every single little thing about this show, and you'll start seeing the same with all these other shows and other movies that come out.
Yeah, I think that if you want to take that lesson from the creative process of Andor, the way it's creator driven, the way you know there was nothing held back from the production of this show. Yeah, they had to prove themselves with season one before they could get that fully for season two, but um, the support behind it, I think, is one of the big lessons to learn from Andor. That a creator driven show like this can be wonderful if it has the support from the studio. So that's a good lesson to learn. But I think generally, yes, taking Star Wars seriously, taking the rules seriously, taking the look and the feel seriously, um, that stuff can be added to every tone of Star Wars project. Like there are just we've seen too many just ridiculous things in a lot of these shows. Things that just make no sense or just really goofy, even for like the myth side, the childlike side, even for like the Jar Jar Binks or Ewoks side of Star Wars, right? There are some things in these shows that just you look at and you go, really? Like the Obi-Wan and Leia walking in the trench coat through the Inquisitor stuff like that. Those types of things, just if you took it a little bit more seriously, some of these moments can be fixed. Um, but then on the flip side, you do still need to have some fun with Star Wars. And so, like Ryan Landis is saying, Star Wars won't ever be just one style of storytelling, and it won't. It will never be, especially when you have a company that owns it who's going to can want to continue getting content out. Like it can be one style of storytelling if it's owned by George Lucas and he's just makes something when he wants to make it. But even then, he was allowing all these different versions of games and books and all these things that were all these different tones and genres to exist. But if we're specifically talking film and TV, like it's a part of a major company. So we're going to keep getting Star Wars until it's completely unprofitable, and that I don't think that'll really ever happen. At least not soon, hopefully. So
Yeah.
we inherently, if you're going to do that, you can't tell the same story over and over and over again. It's got to be different types of storytelling. So I agree with you, Ryan, on that point. But I think on the same level, Star Wars, because of its origins in the George Lucas you know the person of George Lucas, the mind of George Lucas, you have to adhere to like what is traditionally Star Wars and then what is other like tones for Star Wars. What we can do a Star Wars horror, we can do a Star Wars spy thriller, we can do a Star Wars political thriller, and it's important that the word Star Wars is at the front of that, right? But something that's inherently truly Star Wars, something that's part of that myth from the mind of George Lucas, that's something else. It's almost its own genre. It's that science fiction fantasy genre that wasn't created by Lucas, but was completely and utterly revolutionized and revitalized by George Lucas. So, and I think what's going to continue to get interesting is like you were kind of saying, Seneca, I mean, in 30 years, you might be arguing with people. I mean, it's going to be really, really different when we're
Yeah.
celebrating Star Wars' 50th in 2 years, right? George Lucas was involved with the franchise for 35 years, and now we're going on. It was 10 years in 2022 when Disney bought it. It was 10 years this year from their first film. Last year was 10 years since their first original projects. Like, as we start to get close to that 35-year mark of Disney, what does Star Wars still look like and feel like to newer generations of audiences? Because it's gonna have, like you're saying, Ryan, I mean, the different styles of storytelling weren't necessarily there with George, but with Disney, we've had so many stories. Star Wars doesn't necessarily have one specific vibe to a lot of younger audiences, right? So how does that all work? It's kind of interesting. It'll be an interesting discussion, an interesting thing to see here in the future. I think one thing that a lot of us can probably agree on is the fact that you don't have to do something as politically driven and emotional and complex as Andor. But a lot of Disney's biggest hits with Star Wars have been when they've tried to do something that's different, or tried to bring in other genres, or tried to do something about a no-name character, or expand on a some blank surface, allows them to be creative, versus the things they've done that are closer to the George Lucas side of Star Wars haven't necessarily been as successful. And, outside of Clone Wars Season 7, I can't really think of too many specifically ironed down George Lucas Star Wars things that have been universally praised from the Disney era in terms of film and TV, especially. Because Rebels doesn't really have much connection to the George Lucas side of Star Wars outside of the stuff that George co-created with Dave Filoni in Clone Wars. So I don't necessarily include that. So I'm kind of looking at the sequel trilogy films, and maybe Rogue One you can include there because it literally starts, ends moments before A New Hope. But yeah, I think they have generally a little more success when they start with a blank page and say, okay, what can we create? And yeah, they've had some of their bigger failures that way too, but you're always going to have, equal amount of failures as successes when you have a blank page, a blank canvas. It's about taking those risks, and
Yeah.
when they've taken the risks and they've hit, it's been their best stuff. When they've gone back to like the Obi-Wan shows or the uh, Boba Fett shows, stuff like that, those have been some of their more middling things they've made.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, at the end of the day, a lot of this can also be looked at as, like, Disney's Bantam era, that they're kinda just, like, doing things all at once, right? Just like how Shape It came in after Iger, and this was, like, pumped at a lot more quality. Like, people forget he was, like, the brains behind the straight to VHS, straight to DVD back in the day. This is basically what he did with streaming. Yeah, it's not surprising, you know? Like, 3rd time's the charm, really? Like, I don't know, that I looking back at it, I don't understand how that philosophy was s like, almost primed as, like, the successor for all of the Disney franchises, and he did something that most people haven't under Disney ownership, just made the parks, like, way worse, right? And it's just like, that's, like, the one thing you can't mess up, and he did that too, so, he was on a short leash and then just became shorter because of stuff like this, and I do wonder if looking back, maybe in 10 years, we might be getting same tonally sort of the shifts that we get in a Kenobi and an Ahsoka and all that. It might feel light and breezy, but maybe we just find the execution so much better. Maybe we find they aren't using the volume as much and there's a little bit more movement in scenes, more camera work, better lighting. Everything might just be a little bit more sharper, right? And that maybe that's all they really needed, right? Like, we're going through all these different what does Star Wars feel things. Sometimes we're also forgetting Star Wars also worked under George Lucas because he took his freaking time, right? Like 3 years of pre-production and post-production filming, like, he took forever by modern standards. Even for his time, he was already pushing a little bit like, "Hey, this is like what you did in the '70s and '80s. Why does it have to take this long?" Forefront of technology and everything, he pushed it. He pushed all those films, and he still didn't have enough time, right? He'd still have, like, working off the shooting script, like, a day before Attack of the Clones was going into primary shooting, like, right, like, it's crazy to think about it, but you need time and space to do these Star Wars shows and movies and everything, and maybe doing a little less will help, and having gaps, right? We've talked about, like, what'll the gap be like on our channel. It might be beneficial so that everyone can kinda collect their thoughts about recent stuff in Star Wars. There's gonna be people catching up on Skeleton Crew, maybe that's sort of the vibe that they wanna see Disney lean more towards. There's gonna be things that will change, right? Maybe Andor season 2 is like how Zahn kinda capped off the end of the Bantam era, right? Like, he defined it, and he's gonna have his biggest stamp. Maybe that's what Andor is gonna be like, but things will change, undoubtedly, moving forward, and I'm sure we'll find something that'll be maybe not as objectively excellent as Andor, but it hits so many more notes than we're seeing in The Mandalorian stuff. Or maybe The Mandalorian just gets a lot better when it shifts to movies and Ahsoka gets a lot better, that they have a little bit more time, more budget, everything. It could be some like, at the end of the day, these are things that are run by humans. Humans make mistakes, and humans in a world that was dominated by COVID for 3, 4 years just overexerted themselves with streaming and, what their franchises are capable of doing. Maybe we'll see what the post-requel era looks like with time, space, and just seriousness, that from the best lessons that Andor's provided.
And the in general, like the straight to DVD look to it streaming is like it's a it's a look that doesn't necessarily work. It can work in hindsight, like when you look at the past, straight to DVD and straight to VHS video and stuff like that worked as a way to keep things alive. You didn't have to
Yeah,
make a full on TV show. You can make a TV level movie and put it out and make a bunch of money, and it would keep a franchise alive. So simultaneously, people would come to the parks and still be excited about that thing. But in streaming, people, the level of quality has been so high for the best things across the board, whether it's Andor or HBO or stuff like that, that people don't let mediocre stuff that they would have let pass 10 years ago. They don't let those things pass now. And I mean, it's better because we hold these studios to a higher level now. We
yeah.
request and we demand a higher level of quality, as we should. We shouldn't be accepting. We are the consumers. We drive business for every market, right? So just as in movies, we shouldn't be thankful that we're getting mediocre stuff. I won't ever say that we should be throwing a fit over all this stuff, but we should never let something go if it's not good. We have to say it's not good, and there needs to be some type of resurgence and dialogue between fans and filmmakers again and studios where they tune a lot of us out because there are so many dramatic and over dramatic fans out there, but they don't listen to the ones who have genuine criticism. And so we should always be demanding the highest level of quality for our money, but at the same time they have to learn that, and this has been a trial by fire. And I think comparing it to Bantam has been is a good comparison because they've thrown stuff out and seen what the reaction is. That, like, you can't just put Boba Fett in a show and have everybody be excited because Boba Fett's on screen. Like, it needs to reach a certain level. And so I think that's the one positive you can maybe take out of this first 6 years of Disney Plus, is that we've seen the high highs, we've seen the low lows. They've now taken that into their plan. And I think by taking a year off, they definitely seem to be at least adhering to the idea of, like, okay, because they're just because you make something or are involved with making it doesn't mean they don't watch it and they're not like, this is pretty bad too, or this isn't as good as it could be. They're not going to say it publicly, but I'm sure they feel that way. And so they want to deliver the best stuff possible because delivering the best stuff possible means the most money, which means their jobs are safe, which, all that stuff, right? It's all one big happy family. They want to succeed. We want them to succeed. All of it needs to work together. And I'm glad we're going on out on such a big high like Andor season 2, because it shows that, yes, this was the standard in these last 6 years. We reach the pinnacle of that standard. What can you do now next in the next phase of Disney Plus Star Wars and Star Wars theatrical that gets us back to this level a little bit more consistently? If this is a one in every 5 shows now, can we get to a level? And again, it doesn't have to be the same tone or same emotional impact as Andor, but can we get back to a Star Wars story that's as well liked or well received as Andor seasons 1 and 2 and Mandalorian season 1 and 2 more consistently than we have been? I think that's the challenge, obviously, for the next phase. And if they get to that, where like every 3 out of 5 shows they make is an 8 out of 10 or better, then they'll be really firing on all cylinders. If they get to the point where somehow they're making 4 out of 5, then they'll be on the top of the world, right? So,
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
that's where we're going. If they're at 1 out of every 5 shows are at this level right now, or 5 seasons, then hopefully they can get to 2 or 3 next phase, and I think that's kind of the way we look at it, and there it's still a new world for everybody with streaming and, like, the need to make this style. Like, Disney's been in TV for a long time. They've never been into streaming quality TV, and I think that's where HBO's had the leg up is they've been making this high level quality of TV for 30 years. Most of these companies are new to doing this on TV. They're used to it on film, but they're not used to it on TV. And I think it's been a culture shock for a lot of them seeing the reception to a lot of these things where, yeah, maybe if it was on ABC or the CW, people would be like, oh, that was a pretty good Obi-Wan show. But then if it's on streaming, people are like, man, there was some great fights, but like it looked under budget and it looked small and there are scenes that are kind of ridiculous, and that's when it starts to fall apart. So it's an interesting conversation. But yeah, we've gone for 2.5 hours, and we appreciate you guys joining us. I guess we'll wrap it up with one last question, maybe. Um, with Darth Revan, who says, "What do you guys think happened to Clea, Vel, and Dedra during the events of the original trilogy?" So Clea, I like the idea of Clea. I'm still going to throw it out there that she becomes like kind of a spy master for the rebellion. I think it's a role that you don't necessarily ever need to see her again for her to have some type of impact, right? Because spies are under the radar, and that she kind of finds this new family. Vel, the whole conversation. I have friends everywhere. I think that kind of plays into Clea's, becoming comfortable with the idea of this group, and so I kind of like that idea. And I think Vel would go right alongside with her with that. They've both lost so much. They both had so many connections to each other and to Luthen. They've been forged in the same places. So I think she would go along with that. Dedra's not getting out of Narkina 5. I Not to be morbid, but I wouldn't be surprised if Dedra, purposely does something that ends her journey. Because I think she's got to be just devastated. She was at the highest rank, and I don't think she ever turns into a good guy, but I think she'd be somebody who'd be suffering there to the point of not being able to take it anymore. But yeah, so I don't know if we ever see her again, but I think it's pretty fitting in for her type of character, and it works really well. So honestly, I don't think we need it really any more about any of them for the original trilogy. I think the show left them in good spots. If we got a little bit more about Clea and Vel doing some spy stuff, I think that would be pretty cool. But I'm pretty satisfied with all three of their journeys.
Yeah, I think the only person that really has a lot of story potential left is Clea, right? And it should almost be more of when they had the perfect luck, when everything was disconnected. Ideally, you want Clea to go back to how she was in season 1, because that would give her most peace of mind, and now there's a few more layers, a few more friends to protect her now that she's not just isolated, right? Like, yes, it gave her so much protection, but if something that was that close struck at home, we've seen how badly it can go, right? Luthen had to sacrifice himself, right? And have Leia ensure he died, right? Like, that's a lot to really deal with, especially for someone that's, like, essentially your found daughter of sorts, right? So, I can see a lot of that be built out in comics and stuff like that that could involve a little bit more of, like, working with, like, the sinister workings of the rebellion or, like, different groups and, governments that are joining the New Republic or something, and maybe she has a role there, but I could also just see her be calm and just working on Yavin and wherever the rebellion is pushed out to by the Empire and kind of almost be like Vel, right? Like, now I've done all the big things. I've given everything. This is how I rest by, like, taking a step back, ensuring I can help the next person take that step, right? I could see it happen for both of them, absolutely. Dedra is gonna absolutely try herself like that one person that was implied to in like, what, the 2nd episode of the Narkina 5 arc?
Yeah.
That's absolutely gonna happen to her. It that or she's on a floor that gets completely wiped out, um, especially once the Death Star is exploded. That's I mean, as far as we know, she could die in 2 days, right? Like, that's how fast the turnaround could be, like, once the Death Star is exploded, once it's up to Palpatine's attention, Vader is returning back to form, it all goes so wrong, the rebellion is starting other rebellions and everything. Yeah, I could see any sort of evidence connected to the Death Star just be destroyed. Simple as that. Just be like, "You're the only other person that has thousands of pages of research and notes and everything about what we did for this project. Clear it out. Clear it out," right? Unless, you really wanna do something super strange and, like, connect her to the Bothans and be like, "This is how she redeems herself," and I'm like, let's not. That gets too much of, like, the EU space of, like, everything being so connected and everybody having, like, 20 years between being a good guy and then a bad guy and then a good guy again. It doesn't have to happen. Sometimes characters have a defining period in their life, and that's it.
Yeah, I don't like the idea of Dedra ever becoming a good guy. Like,
No,
I think
no.
she's too buried in her ways. Like, it's we saw, and again, I would have liked to see, and that's another, negative of the 1 year jumps. I would have loved to see something with her post Cyril dying, like just see her reaction, like her finding out that he died. But I still think ultimately she would end up in the same place as she was in the show, where she 100%, I mean, I said that in the predictions, she 100% commits herself to finding access to the detriment of her own career and the rules of the Empire, to the point where she's, gone from the Empire. And the ISB is basically purged. Like, all these people are gone. They're all either dead or gotten rid of
Yeah.
or shot themselves. It's just like it completely falls apart. By the so that's kind of interesting watching that. But yeah, I don't think Dedra ever becomes a good guy. So that's her fate. And I guess let's wrap it up with Ryan's question here, because I think this is a good one at moving into the future. And again, we kind of, for those of you who haven't joined us in the past, when we move into our live Q&As next week, or again, next week is tenuous. I have a commitment on Tuesdays next week, so we might do it later, or we might just take the week off. But when we return with our live Q&As, which at the latest will be 2 weeks from today, we allow you guys to just ask anything you want. So, I mean, any Star Wars related question, non-Star Wars related question. And so something like Ryan's last question here is something that we get a lot on those live Q&As. So if you guys would like to join us to talk about that, come back. We've really enjoyed having a lot of you newer faces on the channel, as well as our older fans on this channel. So we appreciate all the support. And again, Ryan says, any ideas or themes you'd like to see, excuse me, for future Star Wars with the name Star Wars? Do future projects need to always have an empire or a rebellion? No, on that last thing, they don't, because I mean, I think it's pretty subjective to the viewer, because Star Wars is a multi generational thing. Different things mean Star Wars to different people. Like for us, and I know for me, we were prequel kids. We grew up in the early 2000s. And so one of my earliest film memories is going to see Revenge of the Sith in theaters when I was 7, and seeing it and just being blown away, right? I'd already been a Star Wars fan for years before that, but Revenge of the Sith wasn't out yet. And following that movie and getting excited for when it was coming out, like that was a big thing. And so there's no rebellion or empire in those movies, right? Those movies are more grounded in the Jedi and the mysticism and the Force and all the philosophy of the Force and the science of the Force and all those different things. Those movies are about that. Versus somebody who's an OT purist, it's about rebelling against fascism and rebels versus empire and the spirit of good guys versus bad guys, and the light and hope that a Jedi and a Force user can bring versus the thousands of Force users in the prequels, and how somebody like Han Solo, who's a smuggler, doesn't want anything to do with politics, ends up becoming a hero who cares. Like all those things are part of the original trilogy ethos of Star Wars, that aren't really a part of the prequel. And so I think a little bit closer, sequel trilogy would be a little bit closer to that original trilogy idea, just because it's so steeped in original trilogy themes versus prequel themes. But Star Wars doesn't need to have an empire or rebellion. I frankly think they should go away from that for future Star Wars post Rise of Skywalker, because it's just getting a little redundant at this point. But I think the core of Star Wars will always be that, like the most recognizable stuff will always be that. So we'll always return to dark times. We'll always return to original trilogy timeline. We'll always return to these eras for all future Star Wars. We're always going to have something going on in this time period, because that's the thing that is mostly iconic to the most Star Wars fans. Now it'll be interesting in 20, 30 years, But right now, for people alive right now who enjoy Star Wars, that's the thing that everybody sees a stormtrooper and they're like, "That's Star Wars," right? So I think we'll continue to have that, but it doesn't need to have that. And for future ideas and themes, I'd like to see them explore. Personally, I've wanted to see a couple different things for a long time, but Old Republic is the thing. Like that to me is we talk about the next prestige show for Star Wars. If they could find a way to get Old Republic to the Andor level of seriousness with the Mandalorian level of attention to the mysticism and lore side, having those two things married plus with the excitement and battles that are in the Old Republic video games and the books and stuff like that and comics and able to put that to screen, bringing in some Game of Thrones, bringing in some of these other shows that have done this stuff really well on TV. I mean, that's for those people who say Andor is boring, or for those people who say that Andor isn't really Star Wars, it's too melodramatic, or it's too this or to that. That's your place to satisfy all Star Wars fans because you'll have epic lightsaber duels, you'll have battles, you can have politics, you can have the religious side, the philosophies of the dark side and the light side, and you have all of that existing in one big moment. And so if they can do that, I've always said it needs to be like a couple different shows. You have your core show, you have your spin-off shows, you have your spin-off movies, you have your spin-off books and comics, but you have that core show centered around the main characters, and then it kind of jumps a little bit in time, and you have another core show. You shrink that timeline down from 3, 4, 5,000 years to 1,000 years of time, 1,500 years of time, and you bring in Darth Bane a little closer, and you just make it all a little more connected. And you like imagine Lucasfilm doing this for like 15 years. It just got the Old Republic driving Star Wars, and I think that's the thing. That's the idea they should go with next. As for like themes or genres, I would love to see if any them really tackle anything with serious intent. But I think the things that work best for Star Wars is something that's either um, in that kind of thriller, political thriller style realm, action thriller, or I want to see horror selfishly because I love horror, but it's not necessarily a forefront of what Star Wars should do. But if they did it, I'd be really excited for them to try it. But I think, yeah, some type of action thriller, political thriller, um, anything like that would be some of the themes that they should go after. But yeah, I think Old Republic is their place. That's the place for them to hit the next home run, for them to find their thing that can bring all fans across every generation together because it has so many things and it can exist in its own era that's so different and unified from so many different parts of what it ultimately uses to make Star Wars storytelling, right? So that's where I'd want them to go.
Yeah, I mean, I've already talked about a lot of the ideas and stuff that I'd like to see, like post Rise of Skywalker, or running into Exegol, stuff like that. Like I've already thrown a lot on the channel, but I'll focus more on the back end of it. What future projects need to always have an Empire or Rebellion? No, no, like Liam said, doesn't make sense. More like the good and the bad, the light and the dark, right? How it manifests is where its storytelling should be and always has to be creative for it to be successful. It's why people praise the High Republic so much. It's in a really tight spot, set before the prequels. Forget about the Acolyte, that's not really connected in any way. You have to do a whole conflict with the Nile, with the group that's kinda related to the Force, but not really, and their perspective versus the Jedi at their peak, and the Republic in a golden age, right? Nothing about it screams like things will go bad. They do, but in the long run of things, it's just a couple bad years, and it really affected the Jedi, but it was like they had a bad fever or something, and then they got better, right? That's how the rest of the galaxy looks at it, but reading it, experience it, you're like, "Wow, there's so much battle and conflict and loss and powers learned and everything." There's just a lot of that, right? And it works. There's no hint of an empire anywhere. There's no rebellion, right? Just Jedi trying to do Jedi things. So it'll work in every way. Like Liam said, I want that Old Republic show badly. It needs to be compression because we know I think a good Old Republic show would ideally take maybe the Tales of the Jedi, turn it into almost fables, or condense it into like a 1 or 2 season arc max, or make it a spinoff that is referenced or properly, unlike how it was in the games. Deal with that KOTOR storyline, go into a KOTOR 3. Star Wars: The Old Republic probably doesn't really have to happen the same way, but, bring some characters and stuff if it makes sense. Make way, way more emphasis on Knight Errant and all that with, like, the new Sith Wars and everything going on there, because that's one thing I really don't like about the Old Republic. You don't really get the sense of, like, the galaxy's been devastated on every planet, people are just trying to survive at some point because of how long the fighting's been going on. It kinda just does, and then you reach the Bane trilogy. Condense it, make it smoother. You've got 6 premium seasons that can jump around. You can do what Rings of Power tries to do with its second age storytelling, but actually do it in a way which Star Wars fans would actually enjoy it and embrace it because there are a lot of flaws in how the Old Republic is structured. There's no way a Tales, a KOTOR, the Old Republic, and a Bane trilogy all fit together seamlessly. It just doesn't make sense, even during these periods of war. So, stuff like that, I wanna definitely see. I mentioned it once, I think almost like a little bit more emphasis on Star Wars romance couldn't hurt, especially with, like, how big book talk and everything's become. I'm just surprised they haven't really targeted that audience. There's so much of an interest in that. We've seen how the Harry Potter fandom had, like, made fan fiction a huge thing, a word that people understood because of everything they're writing. There is stuff like that. Lost Stars is not just a great book, it is a romance book, right? It's a failed, a tragic romance, but people are still clamoring to this day for Claudia Gray, like, "Hey, do Lost Stars 2. What's gonna happen next?" Right? So I'd love to see more of that, and the more you can practice with books and stuff, the better material that you have for, people working on animation or comics or even TV shows and movies that they can pull from internally and be like, "Look, Star Wars has actually had success with their audience with this stuff." Hopefully, we don't have to have as many Anakin and Padmes and a little bit more Han and Leia's, right? Like, that's kinda the goal, right? And I think recently, a lot better, especially with like, mature stuff like Andor for sure, but the stuff that, like, transports you away like Padme and Anakin doesn't really land right until you read books, until you watch the Clone Wars and stuff like that, and I'd like to see some sort of storytelling happen there, forbidden, whatever it may be, but just to, like, see if that's a possibility, if it's, like, executed right, if you make it, like, a core part of a storytelling. I wouldn't want, like, a whole era or, like, a whole initiative, but a couple books here and there, but, like, a very disconnected characters, why not? Like, keep trying all that stuff, so, yeah, I and just as, like, a capper, I would say I really am shocked that there hasn't been as much of a push for the virtual reality space because they've Star Wars has been pretty aggressive about it. We're getting a new game, but it's gonna be mostly like a top-down view with your own, like, AR scapes, and that's kinda disappointing to hear because can you imagine immersive VR pod racing? Like, that should have been it, but hopefully the story's solid enough to follow through, but yeah, no, like, keep pushing it. Vader Immortal was a long time ago now. K Yeah, I know we have Tales from the Galaxy's Edge and all that, like, that's pretty fun and all that, but take a real push into that, right? Really see if you can make, like, a standalone big game franchise for VR enthusiasts. That's a great way to get people into VR. If you've always had this franchise be pushing the technology of it and have had such a strong history in video games, I'm surprised they haven't kinda combined both pursuits when VR is right there. It's expensive, yes, but you make a game, people will come.
Absolutely. I mean, video games should be a space where Star Wars continues to expand because we talk about genres. I mean, that's a place where you can fully invest yourself into genre storytelling without it feeling like a gimmick. So I think that's a place they need to go. And that's going to wrap up our stream tonight, everybody. We're almost 3 hours, but it was a fun, supersized episode for you all. So I hope you guys enjoyed it and that you enjoyed our coverage of Andor overall. So thank you so much for joining us for Andor and for these last 4 weeks. It's been a lot of fun talking Star Wars with you all for these last few weeks. Again, don't go anywhere because we have a lot of great content still coming out on our channel. We just hit 30K subs today, and we're excited to continue pushing forward. So, thank you to everybody who's just joined. Thank you to everybody who's been here since we started the channel in 2021. We appreciate all of you so much and for joining our stuff constantly and for commenting and discussing things with us on stream and for telling us your ideas. We love having this community and for getting a, getting a chance to talk Star Wars with you all. I mean, we talk Star Wars all the time, and Star Wars is our favorite thing. And it's just nice to be able to share it with all of you and have hear all your guys' thoughts and hear people who think like us and disagree with us and all of that stuff. So it's been a wonderful ride here on the channel, and we're just getting started. So hopefully you guys continue to join us. Again, like I said, videos usually come out twice a week every Friday you'll get a video. Another video will come out usually Monday or Tuesday, so you can keep checking out our channel for that. We do live streams every single week. So you can join us for those live streams. Ask us anything you want. It can be Star Wars related. It can be non-Star Wars related. We'll talk about the latest in Star Wars news, and we'll take your guys' live questions. So make sure you join us. Those will be on Tuesdays, not at this 9 p.m. Pacific time. We did this just for Andor, so we could binge watch the show. Usually we start around 7. So make sure you join us if you're thinking that, every week you watch on replay because it's a little too late. That's just the unfortunate nature of how they decided to release Andor this time. So we couldn't really do anything about that. So hopefully you guys have enjoyed this coverage, but make sure you join us. It'll be around 7 p.m. Pacific time on our channel for live Q&A and for Star Wars news stuff. So make sure you join us for those in the future. Again, shorts Monday, Wednesday, Friday, every single week. Polls twice a day, every day. Right now we're running a character tournament in the morning, 7 a.m. Pacific time poll for that. And then the movie and TV shows tournament, 1 p.m. Pacific time for that one. And you can check out the results. Those are pinned comments on every single poll. So if you want to check out the results of those polls, or you didn't know they were building towards something, they are building towards results for you guys, your favorite Star Wars stuff. So we like keeping track of that. But yeah, that's all the stuff we've got going on the channel. We got a lot of great new original ideas coming for more Star Wars content, some guides, some rankings, some lore videos, some theories, all that stuff. We've got all of it coming on the channel. So hopefully you guys continue to enjoy our content and keep following us throughout the year as we build and build and build till 2026, which should be an incredible year for Star Wars. Thanks so much to everybody for watching and for joining us for Andor Season 2, and we will see you all next time.